Type, one-handed sword. Grade, common white. Description, it's cut down 25 gray-skinned rats, 12 goblins, and even a goblin bear. Buddy, what more do you really expect from it? Note, stay. True, Qian Tailu, legendary sword saint. Vice captain of the Eternal Radiant Throne Adventure Group, Titus. So this is my golden finger, huh? By the campfire, Xiaonan murmured to himself, staring at the long sword resting across his knees. A faint, translucent panel only he could see hovered above the blade. This was his second day in this world. In his previous life, Xiaonan had been ordinary. Born into a comfortable, middle-class family, he got into a decent university the usual way: hard work and exams. After graduation, he drifted into an internet company, enjoying the blessings of 996 overtime, and climbed his way up to department supervisor by the time he turned 32. On the night of his promotion celebration, he got drunk, waved off his colleagues who offered to drive him home, and decided to walk instead, hoping the night air would clear his head. He had barely made it a few steps out of the restaurant when a blaring horn and the scream of brakes tore through the quiet street behind him. Then everything went black. When he opened his eyes again, he was in this world, inhabiting the body of an 18-year-old farm boy. He let out a quiet sigh as the memories washed over him. The sword's attribute panel faded away as his thoughts drifted. By inheriting the boy's memories, Xia Nan had gotten a rough picture of this place. The good news, this really was a fantasy world with transcendent power. The bard who stayed in their village when he was young, doing little tricks to pay for food, the burly barbarian who'd passed by the tavern recently with a glowing great axe on his back. Those weren't stage props. They were real. The bad news, in this life, he was just an ordinary farmer worried about feeding his family. Aside from the modern knowledge in his head, most of his skills were things like how to plow more efficiently and what crops to plant in which season. None of it had anything to do with transcendence, classes, or magic. It wasn't that Xia Nan looked down on people who worked the land. In his old life, he had actually dreamed of retiring early, leaving the big city, and living a quiet countryside life. But in this world, a few acres of farmland couldn't support a big family. Not safely. That was why he'd left the village and followed an adventurer team into the dangerous wilds. Xia Nan withdrew his gaze from the sword and looked up. The camp was as crude as it got. No tents, just a few worn sleeping bags tossed around the bonfire. Rough silhouettes circled the fire. The flames crackled, and low conversation drifted through the night. Human, dwarf, half-orc. At a glance, it looked like a classic four-man adventurer team. In reality, Xiaonan knew very well. They were just a stinky fish and shrimp group. The dwarf, Elke, was in his early 20s. For a race with a 500-year lifespan, that age gave him no advantage at all. His knowledge and experience were actually worse than Xianan's, who had grown up watching the sunrise and sunset in the fields. He had 2 daggers on his belt and tried to look like some kind of assassin. But Elke was a true right-hander who could barely use his left hand to hold a fork, let alone a knife. Xiaonan had once seen him spend 3 whole minutes trying to unbuckle the bracer on his right arm, using only his left. The only thing above average about him might be his so-called cheerful personality and his horribly timed sense of humor. Next was the half-orc gag. To be honest, half-orc was generous. Xiaonan suspected there was maybe 1/32nd beastman blood in him, if that. Aside from slightly pointed canines and a sturdier build, he looked almost exactly like a human. Still, he barely qualified as a frontliner. As Elke liked to put it, at least the beasts in the jungle get a few extra bites out of him. The last member and leader of this glorious stinky fish and shrimp group was Magi, the human hunter. He was probably the most reliable one here. He'd been a well-known hunter in several villages on the kingdom's western border, but had to run after offending some local noble. Elke claimed to know some details. Ah, women, he had said once, and that was that. So, in the end, their 4-man lineup was a clumsy assassin dwarf, a barely half-orc frontline, a hunter who hadn't reached ranger yet, and a farmer with a common sword and a hidden panel. In Xianan's mind, a proper adventuring party should have at least a warrior, a priest, a mage, and maybe an assassin or ranger. A nice war, magic, healer setup. For this bunch, though, that was pure fantasy. Forget rare spellcasters. They didn't even have a single official low-level professional. Even Magi, their most experienced member, still hadn't become a true ranger or gained his first-class level. Calling them an adventurer squad was charity. Of course, it wasn't that this world lacked professionals. It was that the conditions to become one were harsh. Without absurd luck or piles of resources, ordinary people could live their entire lives without ever touching that level. After all, the bounty for a single goblin was 3 silver and 7 copper coins. That was nearly 2 days' wages for a dock worker. High risk, high reward. Every intelligent being in this world agreed that was the essence of an adventurer. And that was exactly why the Stinky Fish and Shrimp Group had taken this job. It's about half a day from here to where the goblins were sighted in the report, Magi said as he sat by the fire, checking the arrows in his quiver. We should arrive tomorrow morning. Wow, a whole goblin troop, huh? I've never taken on a job this big. Elky waved his dagger with his right hand, his eyes shining in the firelight. On his short body, the excited pose just looked a bit ridiculous. What, you scared? The half-orc smirked. Relax. They're just little green rats about your size. I can crush 2 with 1 toe. Of course. Elky nodded earnestly, going along with the bit. A tough guy like you definitely doesn't cry for mommy in his sleep. Most of Xian'an's real job should have been swinging a sickle through golden wheat, not waving a sword in some monster-filled forest. According to normal logic, the adventuring you hear from minstrels and old drunk uncles at the village tavern should have had nothing to do with him for his entire life. Yet right now, as a member of the Stinky Fish and Shrimp Party, sitting in this shabby camp in the Mist Forest, Xian'an actually had something that made him stand out. If he traced things back using the memories of his predecessor, the story really started 5 years ago, when he was 13. At that time, a broke minstrel had stayed with their family for a while. He did a few little tricks for the village brats, and those tricks kicked open the door to a mysterious world in the young Xian'an's mind. Then, because his predecessor's mother was legendarily stingy within a radius of several villages, the poor minstrel basically couldn't leave without paying some kind of fee. So when he left, he had no choice but to leave behind half a page torn from a skill book. Calling it a book was generous. In appearance, it was just a half-page of parchment with some training methods scribbled on it. But no matter how you looked at it, it had once been part of a real professional skill book. The whole family treasured it. Even a youngest daughter, little 7-year-old Beatrix, had followed along and practiced it for a while. Unfortunately, whether that half-page was just something the minstrel made up on the spot, or whether the entire family simply had no talent, nobody made any progress worth mentioning even after more than half a year. Then the king raised taxes, the farming season got busy, and the page ended up shoved into some corner and forgotten. The predecessor himself was simple-minded and stubborn, and the tricks the minstrel showed him had burned themselves far too deeply into his heart. So even in the busiest harvest days, when he came home from the fields, so tired his waist was about to snap, he still picked up the crude wooden sword he had spent 3 days carving and slashed at straw bundles by the path. Day after day, year after year, wooden swords shattered one after another in his hands. No one knew where that kid, who barely left the fields, got that kind of persistence from. He never skipped a day. Training with the wooden sword simply became a part of his life. Then, 3 months ago one afternoon, just like countless times before, Xian'an stood by the straw dummy he'd built near the field, raised his wooden sword, and swung. And then something different happened. A strange feeling surged up from his legs, which were firmly rooted in the muddy ground, rising through his waist, back, chest, and arms, and finally pouring into the wooden sword via his fingertips. It felt as if every bit of strength and focus in his body twisted together into a single torrent and burst out in an instant. Buzz! The battered wooden sword spun out of his hand and fell to the ground. The straw dummy in front of him was sliced cleanly in half, both sections slowly toppling over. The cut surface was smooth as a mirror. Vortex slash. At that moment, Xianen instinctively knew the name of the move. He had completely mastered a combat technique that, by rights, only a formal Knight Master should be able to use. Everything that followed naturally spiraled from there. His family was just an ordinary farming household whose entire assets were a small mill and a few thin strips of land. They had to somehow raise 3 sons and 1 little daughter on that. The oldest and second son were already at the age to marry and start their own families. So, of course, the open and secret fighting over that pitiful inheritance had quietly begun. From splitting the mill's income to who got to use the stove first. All sorts of tiny squabbles and arguments filled every bit of air in that cramped wooden house. Watching his 2 respected big brothers nearly come to blows over a candle, the just adult third son started to waver inside. He realized that in 2 years, once it was his turn to talk marriage, the same thing would probably happen again. That was when he began thinking about leaving. He had just grasped the professional skill Vortex Slash. Fired up with the reckless courage unique to youth, the predecessor went to the Adventurers Guild in the nearby town, registered as a rookie, and joined a no-name little team called Stinky Fish and Shrimp. Sigh. Thinking back on those impulsive choices, Xianen couldn't help but sigh. By the time he transmigrated, the predecessor was already a member of the team. When his soul finally stabilized, and he finished digesting the memories in this body, he realized he was already deep inside Mist Forest with the others. At that point, it was already too late to regret anything. Complaining wouldn't help. It would only drain his mental energy. He lowered his head and focused on something he could actually do, wiping the blade of his sword with a rag. Speaking of which, even though his 2 older brothers fought fiercely over the family inheritance, they still treated their little brother sincerely well. This one-handed sword had been bought by pooling their savings. The predecessor had cherished it and maintained it carefully. That was the only reason that, even now when it was long overdue for retirement, the blade was still decently sharp. Maybe it could survive a few more tough fights. Hey kid, maybe because Xianen had been silent too long, Captain Magi mistook it for nerves and decided to comfort him. Don't be scared. It's just a few goblins. These little pests, a couple of them, can't even beat the stray dogs back in town. Xianen didn't answer. He just grinned at the hunter, signaling he was fine. Scared? Of course he was. This was his first real adventure as an adventurer. The glorious combat record on his sword's attribute panel belonged to its previous owners and had nothing to do with him. The fact that a veteran weapon like this had ended up in the hands of a green rookie also said something about his predecessor's fate. Whoosh! A chilly gust brushed the back of Xianan's neck, making goosebumps crawl over his skin. True to its name, Mist Forest was soaked in fog. Even under the strongest noonday sun, the haze hung thinly in the air. Now the sun was long gone, and the faint moonlight blended with the mist, making it hard to see more than a few meters. Even sitting next to the campfire, he could barely make out the blurred shapes of the surrounding grass and shrubs. First time in Mist Forest, farm boy. A teasing voice drifted over from his right. He looked up and saw, 5 or 6 meters away on the other side of the camp, the dwarf Elke grinning at him with a mischievous look. "You've been here a lot then?" Xianen asked. Of course. It was like Elke had just been waiting for him to take the bait. His face brightened with excitement. "You don't know anything. I've got a distant cousin who served as an Arcanist attendant for 2 whole years. TSK, that Arcanist was the real deal, a graduate of Hose One Royal Academy, and registered with the official Caster Association. Hey, you probably haven't even heard of Hose One Royal Academy, have you? Let your big brother here educate." The words cut off abruptly. Even if there was some bragging mixed into his story, Xianen had been fully prepared to listen. He was more than interested in anything related to spellcasters. As someone who had just...
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
Notoriously like cockroaches, They're almost found on every plane that associates with the element of Western-style fantasy. These small creatures are inherently greedy and vile. If not for their race's average intelligence being at the bottom among intelligent beings, they might also be described as cunning and skilled at deception. Their species is heavily inclined towards the evil camp, and their low intelligence leads to low productivity, making their survival often linked with plunder and theft. Additionally, the lack of females in their species means they must rely on capturing females of other intelligent beings for reproduction, making them, in some ways, have a worse reputation in the multiverse than abyss demons and hell demons. A goblin's individual combat strength is extremely weak. An ordinary farm woman with a pitchfork can easily take care of an unequipped white plate goblin. But as Hunter Magi described earlier, these little things are like the stray dogs commonly seen in towns. One alone is nothing, but when they gather in groups of double digits, or even triple digits, the courage and destructive power of the goblins increase exponentially, raiding caravans, attacking villages. Especially when their numbers grow to a certain level, an elite individual with leadership abilities naturally emerges. In the long run, if left unchecked, they might even grow into a kingdom-level disaster. Currently, the goblin tribe being tracked by the Stinky Fish and Shrimp group might not yet have developed to the scale of plundering towns. But clearly, it has already gained the capability to actively attack humans. The humorous dwarf who used to like making untimely cold jokes, now a gradually cooling corpse on the ground, serves as proof of this point. Roar! An inhuman roar suddenly erupted in the forest. Half-orc Gag, like a startled jungle beast, sprang up, tightly gripping his blood-stained dual-handed axe. The sudden ambush and the death of a squad mate seemed to remind this half-blood hybrid of some ancestral glory. His vaguely elongated canine teeth and the visibly swollen and reddened muscles all over him indicated that this half-orc was entering a combat state. Hunter Magi was the fastest in the entire Stinky Fish and Shrimp group. Almost at the instant the dark wooden stick emerged from behind Elky's head, he reacted. While loudly warning, with the longbow on his back, he nimbly climbed the towering leather oak behind him using both hands and feet. His thin figure disappeared into the dense canopy in an instant. Though reluctant to admit it, Xiaonan was undoubtedly the slowest responder in the squad. In the 30-some years before crossing over, he had practically gone from classroom to office and hadn't even slaughtered chicken. In this life, he was just an honest farmer who worked the land. One moment thinking about extracting more information about this world from Elky, the next moment he saw Elky being bludgeoned in the head with a club, brain matter spilling out. Xiaonan felt his mind go blank. Although instinctively lifting the one-handed sword on his knee, his body stood still, as if caught in some rigid state. Until, whoosh, the strands of hair swayed, and a fierce draft swept across his cheek, leaving a stinging sensation. A wooden arrow shot through the shadows between the trees, flying out from the treetop above. Ah! A sharp cry of pain sounded from behind. Xiaonan shuddered and instantly snapped back to reality. The world, previously muted, suddenly came alive again. No time to thank Magi above for lending a hand. He quickly turned around. His gaze swept past, and his pupils contracted slightly. There were two short figures bent low, their dark green skin full of blisters, their crimson eyes filled with cunning and malevolence. Their bodies clad only in a dirty brown rag around the waist, limbs thin yet faintly showing bulging muscles beneath. Unnoticed, two goblins had quietly crept up behind him. If not for Magi's warning, he might have ended up like the dwarf Elky. A wave of fear surged in Xiaonan's heart. He unconsciously tightened his grip on the sword hilt wrapped with coarse rope. Waza! Now that the stealth was blown, one of the goblins even had its foot pinned to the ground by the wooden arrow from above. This inherently cowardly creature seemed to lose the courage to continue its assault at that moment. It merely raised the wooden stick high towards the young human before it, in an intimidating manner. The wooden stick, entirely black, appeared with a dangerous orange-red hue under the campfire's light. Xianan, looking at the rusted nails embedded in the surface of the club, suddenly recalled the grim scene of Elke's head cracking open earlier. It was like some sort of stress response. Under the thick sense of fear in his heart, he suddenly took a step forward with his right foot while coiling his right arm to build power. Thud! The foot almost immediately sank into the soft earth. Like the root systems of trees growing downwards to absorb nutrients from the land. An inexplicable force erupted from the soul, gathering power from throughout the body along the bones and muscles, finally unleashing it through the sword blade. Vortex slash. Slash. Amid the tearing air's shrill sound, the swirling mist rolled violently. A sharp silver arc with a beautiful curve vanished momentarily in front of Xianan. At that moment, time and space seemed to fall into a stasis. The meticulously maintained blade, combined with skills practiced hundreds of thousands of times, rendered the goblin's skin, muscle, and bones fragile as sandpaper, easily crushed. Skill level +1. A semi-transparent text flashed before his eyes. Xianan felt a brief resistance in his hand, then had already swung the one-handed sword in a slanted upward slash from left to right, as he had done countless days and nights before. Blood splattered. Falling onto the muddy ground were the goblin's severed hands, half-skulls, foul-smelling innards, and their filthy, scalding blood. These two insidious creatures, aiming to ambush, were sliced in half with a single stroke, like the countless stalks on the field's edge before. The forest seemed to fall into some kind of dead silence at this moment. High above in the treetop, Magi instinctively released the longbow already drawn taut. Eyes moving to glance at the two fragmented bodies on the grass, he turned to look at Xianan, who was slowly exhaling while sheathing the sword. His Adam's apple bobbing twice. An uncontrollable astonishment appeared on his face. Is this really a rookie? When he and Elke were at the Adventure Association, searching for suitable quests on the notice board in the lobby. That shy farm boy who was brought over by the guide. Even though the boy claimed to have mastered a battle skill, Magi didn't really take it to heart. He seemed too many like Xianan, naive hotheads, whether in the mountains at the kingdom's borders or now in River Valley Town. They imagined themselves as the heroes sung by the minstrel, learn a few moves from the village militia, and think they're ready for adventure. Then, with unrealistic dreams, they plunge into forests and dungeons across the continent, only to become nourishment for the plants in the soil. Battle skill. That's one of the prerequisites for becoming a professional. Even an old hand like Magi, who's roamed outside for years, has only learned 1 or 2 moves. How could this clueless kid, who doesn't even know how to plow the fields, learn it by practicing on a few scraps of paper? Even those noble city-born offspring have families who spend a fortune hiring professionals who are already proficient in battle skills, train them from a young age, and even supplement with expensive herbs and equipment. Only then do they manage to achieve a professional level. Back then, although this was what Magi thought, his rich experience allowed him to keep a calm face. On the contrary, he warmly welcomed Xianan to join the team as a temporary member, even spending big to treat him to a plate of gray squirrel fried rice at the White Sparrow Tavern next door. After all, with the difficulty of tasks their small team usually undertook, the strength of the 3 of them was sufficient, but they still needed someone to handle the dirty and tiring work. And if there was an emergency, a newbie unfamiliar with forest terrain could also buy them some time to escape. But unexpectedly, whoosh, Magi released the arrow, which instantly vanished from the bowstring. Accompanying the brief tingle on his fingertips, a sharp scream sounded from the ground under the treetop. He recalled the fleeting silver glint among the trees just now. That level, it was definitely a battle skill. Could it be? This kid got lucky and actually practiced it? No matter what, Xianan had indeed mastered a battle skill. Perhaps his role in the team should be reconsidered? Pulling the bow, releasing the arrow. While Magi's hands continued moving, he was already contemplating. Elke is dead. The team happens to need an immediate force. Once this mission is over, let's bring this kid into the team. His chest heaved. Xia Nen slowly exhaled a long breath. His arms trembled slightly due to overexertion, and the solid feel of the sword hilt pressed into his palm. He recalled the feeling when instinctively using the vortex slash just now. It's hard to describe. After countless practices over the years, this move seemed to have become second nature to him. Charging, aiming, swinging the sword. It wasn't until the goblin's screech of pain reached his ears that he realized it wasn't a straw dummy under the blade, but real flesh and blood. The blood pool spread over the meadow, fragments of limbs scattered on the ground. Xianen felt slightly nauseous, but considering the gruesome scene was caused by goblins, the size and stature difference with humans was significant, even though they were both intelligent creatures. The sense of reality wasn't as strong, so the discomfort in his stomach was barely manageable. Roar! The sounds of fighting came from behind, pulling him from his reverie. The battle was not over. Although Xianen was a novice, he had no intention of retreating. Perhaps that sword had dispelled the fear in his heart caused by Elki's death. Without much thought, he tightened his grip on the sword hilt and quickly moved in the direction of Gag to support him. Roars, screeches, arrows slicing through the air, blades piercing flesh. The battle erupted suddenly and ended just as quickly. Altogether, it didn't even last 10 minutes, and the forest returned to silence. Only the rich scent of blood lingered in the air. The goblins' ambush could be said to be quite effective. At the start of the fight, they successfully reduced the stinky fish and shrimp team by taking out a key member. But subsequently, they showed their true nature as bottom-tier demons. Faced with resistance from the other team members, they gradually fell into a disadvantage. Especially after Xianen cut 2 goblins in half with his sword, the situation instantly collapsed, swaying in favor of the team. Without the courage of gang acts, the goblins, even while still wielding weapons, suddenly saw their fighting power plummet. Gag held the front line, a dual-handed axe in his grip, swinging furiously. Xianen roamed the battlefield's flanks, finishing off enemies where needed. Wooden arrows occasionally shot out from the dense canopy above, perhaps not hitting every time, but still proving effective. A total of 16 goblins. Xianen took down 5, while Magi shot 6 with just his bow and arrows. Gag, covered in blood, appeared fierce and heroic on the battlefield. Ultimately, he only cut down 5 goblins, the same as the newly joined Xianen. Cleaning the battlefield. Imitating Hunter Magi's actions, Xianen stepped on a goblin's head and used the one-handed sword to cut off its left ear. This was his trophy. Despite feeling slightly uncomfortable with the process, knowing that the bounty for just 1 goblin could reach nearly 4 silver coins, almost equivalent to 2 days of work for a city laborer. Xianan's hands moved more swiftly and forcefully. Here, take it. A goblin ear, stained with blood, was handed over. Xianan looked at Gag in surprise. If he remembered correctly, this goblin, although finished by him, had actually been almost dead after Gag's dual-handed axe struck its head before he even moved. He thought that should count as Gag's kill, so he didn't concern himself with it. He didn't expect the half-orc to help him cut the ear and hand it over. You've got some skill, kid. I'll buy you a drink later. Gag slapped Xianan's shoulder with his blood-stained big hand, speaking in a gruff voice. In fact, before this battle, the two hadn't interacted much. Xianan was somewhat dazed from trying to absorb memories in his mind for one. On the other hand, it was also because Gag somewhat looked down on the newcomer. With Beastman heritage, the concept of respect for the strong permeated all his perceptions. Unlike Magi, he didn't think much about it. He only saw Xianan joining the team as dead weight with no value. Until just now, when Gag saw Xianan's performance in battle firsthand, he truly acknowledged him. He considered Xianan as a part of the team. These little green-skinned creatures have nothing but a piece of rag on them, and their weapons are poorly made, not as sturdy as a hoe used in the field, so useless that no one would want them, not even the slightest bit of extra loot. Xia Nan and others would just cut off the goblins' left ears and find a pit to bury them. This would prevent the smell of the bodies from spreading further in the air, thus attracting other dangers. Splash. The moist soil scattered down, gradually covering the bodies piled up in the pit. Worth mentioning is that Elke was also among them. The fact that he was once a squad member didn't earn him any special privilege. Just like those similarly short goblins, he was casually thrown into the burial ground. Even Captain Magi considerately stripped him of his crude equipment and supplies, leaving only a patched, thin shirt. Gag stood by the pit, most of the bloodstains on his upper body already wiped off, but a few wounds still faintly oozed blood. He looked down at Elke, gradually covered by the sand and soil, his eyes slightly red. But don't get it wrong. This wasn't due to an emotional upheaval over the death of a comrade, but more likely the afterglow of the adrenaline rush from the fight. At least, that's Xianan's understanding based on all these days with him. Perhaps this half-blood orc did feel some faint sympathy for the fallen comrade, but it would be extremely minor. More likely, it was resentment that the effort for this task didn't match the reward. The relationships among adventurers, especially in such low-level squads where casualties often occur, are far more pragmatic and indifferent than you would imagine. And in fact, it is true. After helping Magi fill the pit with earth, Gag's first words were complaints. And hashtag at %UN, orc swear words. 1 dead, and we earned less than 2 gold coins. Can't even buy a donkey. What bad luck. Though to Xianan, the bounty for 5 goblins was already a fortune, the half-orc was evidently not satisfied. The resentment in his heart even made him stomp harder than usual, leaving deep footprints on the grassland. When Xianan thought his first adventure would end just like this, Magi, who had been silently packing his belongings since the end of the fight, suddenly said unexpectedly, "Actually, just like the legendary greedy dragons, goblins also like to stash their loot in their nests." The atmosphere on the scene seemed to freeze at this moment. Half-orc Gag widened his eyes and turned around abruptly. "You mean, according to the task information provided by the association, this goblin settlement has at most no more than 20 goblins." Magi slung the refilled quiverback onto his back and slowly got up. "What we dealt with just now were likely their main forces, which means the nest." Gag's voice, deliberately lowered in excitement, was somewhat sharp. "An empty nest." Magi nodded seemingly calmly, though the depths of his eyes also showed excitement and elation. A goblin nest likely lacking defense. A low-level adventurer squad, still maintaining most of its strength. There's some risk involved, but compared to the potential reward, what does that risk amount to? Besides, as an adventurer, if you're not willing to take even a bit of risk, you might as well go home and farm. Driven by the greed in their hearts, Gag and Magi quickly began a heated discussion on the location of the goblin nest, the preparation before entry, and even how to distribute the loot within. Xianan did not participate in it. As a newcomer adventurer who just crossed over to this world, he wasn't very well informed about the current situation or the habits of goblins. Although he vaguely felt that heading back directly would be more prudent, the points raised by the two weren't without reason. Moreover, even if he refused, whether staying in place waiting for them to return or heading back to the nearby town, he'd have to act alone. In the Mist Forest, a place filled with demons, moving alone was just too dangerous. So, he might as well just follow along. Maybe he could earn a few more gold coins later. For adventurers, money is the most effective catalyst for all actions. The Stinky Fish and Shrimp group showed an extremely strong action force in the face of possible treasure. In merely a dozen minutes, Gag and Magi completed a plan that seemed crude but actually wasn't all that unsophisticated. They decided to rest for a night to regain strength and set off to find the goblin nest at dawn. The campfire swayed. Snoring rose and fell from the simple sleeping bags beside him, mingling with the unknown insect chirps from the dense forest behind him. The warm firelight shone on Xianan's face, casting an orange-red glow. The stinky fish and shrimp group had already camped at another location. Hunter Magi also set traps around, but considering the gnome Elky, who was already buried in the ground, Xianan didn't quite trust the quality of these traps. So, when it was his turn to stand guard, he was particularly attentive. He even moved his seat to a spot closer to the inner circle of the camp, so that even if something bypassed Magi's traps, he'd have enough time to react. It was a quiet midnight. Only now did Xianan finally gain time for himself without drawing others' attention. He placed his one-handed sword across his knees, gripping the bandage with his right hand, seemingly focused on maintenance. But his eyes weren't on the sword itself. Instead, taking in the firelight in front of him, he gazed at his own reflection on the sword blade. 1 second, 2 seconds. With concentration slowly gathered, lines of translucent square texts appeared before him. Name, Xianan. Attributes, strength, 5, muscle strength, physical training, bodily potential. Agility, 5, reaction speed, balance ability, agility. Constitution, 5, endurance and vitality. Intelligence, 5, memory, logic and reasoning ability. Perception, 5, observation and insight ability, representing harmony with the surrounding environment. Charm, 5, personality and charisma. Skills, Vortex/LV4, 99 out of 100. As I thought, Xianan exclaimed to himself. Ever since seeing the skill level +1 text flash before his eyes during the battle with the goblins, he had been very conscious of it. Now, with a small effort to verify his suspicion, just as he thought, not only the stats of items and equipment, but through reflections, I can also see my own attributes. Compared to the surprise brought by the quantification of his own attributes, his various values were not particularly remarkable. All 6-dimensional attributes were 5, seemingly just at the level of an ordinary person. Moreover, the attribute panel itself was extremely simplistic, like it came from some unfinished third-rate game, revealing nothing significant. The only thing worth mentioning was that solitary existence in his skill panel. Vortex/LV4 99/100, just 1 point away from leveling up? Xianan murmured to himself in his heart. Although he knew it couldn't be rushed, after all, he was just 1 point away from leveling up to LV5. He couldn't help but feel itchy, desperately wanting to know what benefits this level up could bring him. His mind recalled the moment when his skill level increased earlier. I wonder if using moves in combat provides more of a bonus compared to regular training. Having just traversed to this world not long ago, he was a newbie adventurer with only 1 skill inherited from his original self. The attribute panel had only a few lines, again yielding no flowers. Xianan glanced over it a few more times, then gathered his thoughts and returned to his watch duty. The next day, at dawn, the stinky fish and shrimp group packed up their various supplies and left the camp. The mist forest in the early morning had visibility comparable to nighttime. The air was filled with dense mist, combined with the lush vegetation that looked the same in Xianan's eyes, making it impossible for anyone to discern the path. After walking for half a day, he even had the illusion that they had been treading in place all along. Yet the 2 people ahead displayed a confident demeanor, as if they had a small map in their heads. Xianan said nothing, following closely like a little tail. When the 2 stopped, he stood still. When they lowered their voices, he crept along quietly as well. As to why low-level adventurers like the stinky fish and shrimp group could walk freely in the mist forest as if strolling through their backyard, and even locate the vague direction of the goblin nest in the complex terrain. Xianan had some vague guesses. On one hand, it could be the past experiences as seniors, allowing Magi and others to rely on some unknown details of the forest to distinguish directions. On the other hand, from seeing this hunter away from home frequently pause his steps and sniff the ground like a hound, he probably had mastered some exclusive precursor skills akin to Vortex/ belonging to a certain class. Yet, like Gag and Magi, never mentioned the skills he performed after battles. It was as if they hadn't seen them at all. Xianan didn't ask much about it. He just kept it in mind to avoid unnecessary disputes by not chattering more than needed when encountering other adventurers in the future. After an estimated 3 more hours traversing through the forest, a small hill came into view for the few of them. At the center of the hill was a hole of dirt and stone evidently excavated by some creatures, with signs of substantial biological activity at the entrance. A faint stench could be smelled in the air. "We're here." Magi's face showed unstoppable excitement, speaking in a lowered voice. "So, do we just go in directly?" Gag, grasping an iron axe in both hands, had slightly reddened pupils, clearly ready for battle. This kind of cavern shouldn't have any back paths. Magi observed the small hill ahead carefully, hesitated for a moment, and said, "We can go in directly. Later, you take the front, Xianan will be in the middle, and I'll bring up the rear." He weighed the longbow in his hand. "Be careful. Everyone, don't get complacent." Hearing this, Xianan, who was about to follow the team into the cave, couldn't help but voice his doubt. A cave opening of this size should be big enough for 2 adults to stand upright and walk side by side. Is it the goblin's habit to dig such a big entrance? This question seemed to stump Magi behind him, and there was a momentary pause in his voice, staying silent for a while. "The main force has already been dealt with, so why are you bothered with these many questions?" The goblin's treasure was within reach, and Gag's tone was exceptionally impatient. "If you're scared, leave. Otherwise, you won't get a share of the loot in the cave." While speaking, the few had already stepped into the cave. "Damn it!" Xianan cursed under his breath, glanced at the scale of the cave's surroundings, and felt uneasy. "These 2 bastards have pinned me in front and back. If he chickens out during the fight, he's likely the first to get hit hard." At this point, there was no choice but to follow them all the way. In truth, it was because Xianan hadn't been in this world for long and was not well acquainted with the adventurer profession. With a few more days of interaction, he would have understood by then. The reason low-level adventurers are labeled as low-level is partly due to inadequate strength, but also due to their untimely courage, just right fear, consciences that can be blinded by a few bags of gold coins, and brains maneuvered by greed. Frequently changing teammates, still equipped with tattered gear after years of adventuring, a team made up of stinky fish and shrimp, and allowing a complete newbie like Xianan to join. Just from these points, one could discern some clues. However, at this moment, it was too late to consider these things. All Xianan could do was grip the long sword in his hand tightly and remain vigilant of everything around. The cave was not deep, and it soon seemed to come to its end. Gulialu, accompanied by faint firelight, some peculiar sound echoed from the corner ahead. Having long suppressed his excitement, Gag, walking at the front, had his muscles swell up, his eyes redden. "Roar!" He let out an undisciplined roar, raising his dual-handed axe high and charged forward. Then, it was like a wild dog choked by the neck. The roar abruptly stopped. Though Xianan was startled by Gag's voice, his feet moved quickly, following closely behind. Hence, in the next moment, he too witnessed the scene that rendered Gag speechless. Previously mentioned, goblins reproduce by relying on females from other races due to their monogender nature. As humans, a more broadly distributed intelligent species in the multiverse than goblins, possess an astonishing array of high-end combat power. Their ordinary individuals are the most numerous among all races. So, those females abducted by goblins for reproduction purposes were mostly humans. Given the frail constitution of ordinary human individuals, most of these women would lose their lives before bearing a second child, owing to the goblins' brutal and inhumane reproductive method, coupled with the harsh environment. These innately vile hybrids naturally wouldn't conduct any funerals for them. Lurking around the subsistence line, goblins would choose to fill their stomachs first when it came to those pitiable women. Thus arose the scene Xianan witnessed. Bear Goblin. Predictably, this scene would deliver an explosive shock to someone like Xianan, an ordinary modern-day person. Even upon becoming a senior adventurer later on, It would be deeply etched in his memory. However, what made Gag, a half-orc who had been consuming raw and bloody meat since childhood, lose his speech due to fright naturally wasn't a scene they had long been accustomed to, but rather the burly figure sitting at the deepest point of the cave, hidden in the shadow. Behind him was Magi's tremulous scream akin to a rooster's crow, one of the mutations of goblins. Equally evil and greedy, but compared to their frail and weak cousins, bear goblins possess a physique as strong as a genetic mutation and swift as a shadow. They are cold-blooded and brutal, yet possess a certain intelligence, rudimentarily fluent in goblin language and universal language. Certain assassin organizations located in the Western continent even specifically recruit young bear goblins to train them into professional assassins. Almost every bear goblin, after reaching adulthood, has the potential to become a goblin tribe leader. And the goblins under the leadership of a bear goblin boss will find their courage and danger amplified exponentially due to their leader's brutal rule and formidable strength. On the other hand, compared to the goblins' vast numbers that spread across the continent like cockroaches, bear goblins are not numerous. After reaching adulthood, they become self-sufficient and scatter sparsely across various goblin tribes. Often, with minions satisfying their greed for food and treasure, bear goblins are too lazy to personally act, content to dwell like a dragon in their lair. Unless overly greedy or extremely unlucky, encountering one is rare for low-level adventurers. However, if one does face the most powerful entities among goblin-like creatures head-on, the outcome is obvious for those adventurers who haven't even achieved a professional level. Roar! A low and aggressive roar echoed throughout the spacious cave. A nearly 7-foot-tall, imposing figure slowly stood up. Beneath the coarse reddish-brown hair was muscle-gnarled like a grizzly bear, and under the firelight, its yellow-brown eyes gleamed dangerously, with viscous, fetid saliva dripping slowly from the two protruding tusks on its lower jaw. The most eye-catching was the almost half-human tall nail head hammer by its feet. The slender handle made the pitch-black hammerhead very conspicuous, and the ground slightly sunken under its weight, while the surface was densely covered with steel spikes. Hard to imagine the horrific result if such a hammer struck the body seriously. Gag, hold it back! After a moment of panic, the battle-experienced hunter Magi finally reacted and loudly commanded the half-orc at the front of the line. Running was impossible. They were merely 10 meters or so away from the bear goblin, and with its explosive speed far surpassing an ordinary person's, it could cross that distance in a blink. The cave, though somewhat spacious, wasn't wide enough for them to scatter and flee in all directions. Turning their backs in a hasty retreat would likely see them torn to pieces by the bear goblin before even reaching the cave's exit. They must go on the offensive. Xianan, you handle those goblins on the side. Dealing with a single bear goblin required them to fight desperately. If they also had to contend with those irritating green-skinned pests during combat, their survival rate would plummet further. Therefore, Magi could only choose to trust the novice in their team, who had just shown his capabilities, hoping he could buy them some uninterfered focus on the bear goblin. Magi's tension-filled shout instantly brought Xia Nin back to his senses. Before he could even react, he watched as Gag at the front of the group, gripping his hefty dual-handed axe, charged at the bear goblin with a roar. Xianan realized something was amiss. Unlike the other two in the team, he was originally just an ordinary farmer and had never heard the name bear goblin, naturally unaware of its danger level. However, simply from Magi and the others' behavior, it was clear the situation was urgent. In that moment, he had no time for further contemplation. As soon as the hunter's words fell, he gripped his long sword and, steeling himself, sprinted toward the 4 goblins on the side of the cave. Honestly, Xianan felt somewhat uncertain. Different from the chaotic battle in last night's ambush, without his teammates' restraint and cover, in the open cavern, he needed to face the direct attack from 4 goblins simultaneously. Perhaps it was coincidental fortune, or maybe he had some talent for combat. Watching the 4 green-skinned rodents ahead hurriedly pick up their weapons, a flash of inspiration crossed his mind. A direct one-on-4 battle is too dangerous. I must divide the battlefield, attack fiercely to find a breakthrough point. Without any hesitation, the diligently trained level 4 Vortex Slash from years of hard work with his former self was instinctively charged as he ran. Whoosh! A flash of chilling light. The goblin closest to Xianen was swiftly sliced horizontally in half. By then, the remaining 3 green-skinned creatures were already gripping their wooden clubs and charging side by side. Fully absorbed in battle, Xianen, quick with his actions, kicked over the bottom of a burnt, glowing red iron pot in front. Boiling broth mixed with murky grease spilled out. The searing temperatures made the goblins close to him instinctively pause, disrupting their previously tidy formation. The plan succeeded. Xianen took 2 bold steps forward, leveraging his tall physique, powerfully thrusting the one-handed sword forward, and the sharp blade instantly pierced through the goblin's fragile skin into its abdominal cavity. As a gust came his way, he sidestepped to dodge another goblin's descending strike from the side. Meanwhile, without pulling out the sword embedded in demon flesh, he launched another vortex slash in a skewer-like fashion. Slash! The sharp long sword, gathering all its might, shredded the goblin's utterly unprotected weak physique with an overwhelming force. It slit through one goblin's body, accompanied by spurting blinding blood, slicing its companion into 2 separate parts. Only then did the last green-skinned minion manage to skirt around the fallen iron pot, reaching Xianan's position. Immediately finding itself alone, it showcased its cowardice as a low-level demon. Throwing away its wooden club, it turned to flee. Chased down in strides, killed with 2 sword thrusts. Huff! Huff! Xianen breathed heavily. With high concentration, in merely 20 seconds since the battle began, most of his stamina had already been exhausted, even soaking his coarse cloth garments with sweat. The one-handed sword was still tightly gripped in his hand, his right hand trembling uncontrollably, a relentless soreness emanating from his arm muscles. This was the side effect of using Vortex Slash twice in quick succession. At least he completed the task assigned to him by the team, Xianen thought to himself. Meanwhile, he turned his head and looked towards the other side of the battlefield. Those 2 should also. Damn it! A man who looks thin and frail, in most cases, won't have high combat strength. Similarly, if your opponent is a barbarian with muscles hard and large as stone, it's evident that they possess strength corresponding to their physique. An adult bear goblin stands about 7 feet tall, roughly around 2 meters in 2. Coupled with its imposing form filled with strong muscles and thick fat, like a grizzly bear, it looks like a small mountain of flesh from afar. In comparison, Gag, though possessing a thin beastman bloodline, is only slightly taller and bulkier than an ordinary adult human. Even if he triggers his bloodline and enters combat mode, he barely reaches the shoulder of a bear goblin. Standing side by side, it's almost the difference between an adult and a child. The actual combat ability is even more pathetic. Before, Xianan's entire attention was focused on battling the goblin, unable to spare a glance at his surroundings. Thus, he was unaware of what happened on the other side of the battlefield in those 20 seconds. He only saw the scene before him. Compared to the ambush encountered last night, Gag's body was clean, a bit dirty, and hardly any blood stains could be seen. He was also very quiet. There were no incomprehensible beastman slang or deafening roars of rage. Of course, that wasn't because the half-orc suddenly learned human etiquette. It was because, at this moment, he had lost the ability to speak. Shafts of white, broken bones pierced through the flesh, protruding from his abdomen. At the center of his chest was a deep, inward-set hole. His eyes turned white, his mouth opened unconsciously, with frothy blood dribbling down from the corners. Like a broken toy, Gag was lifted by one ankle by the bear goblin, hanging upside down. The dark nail head hammer, covered in iron thorns, was poised in the icy cold air. In that instant, Xiaonan, seeing such a scene, inexplicably thought of the night watchman striking a gong in ancient times. The next second, the nail head hammer disappeared, and a drumbeat echoed. Whoosh bang! Accompanying the whistling of a hard object through the air was a peculiar sound, as if an egg cracked, the hard shell mingling with viscous liquid. The half-orc's body swung like a pendulum. The hammerhead was smeared with a patch of red and white, and Gag lost the ability to make a sound in the physical sense. Plop! The headless corpse was casually thrown to the ground, blood gushing like a fountain, gradually pooling beneath him. Die! Just after Xiaonan witnessed the bear goblin utterly crumble Gag, a hoarse shout tinged with hope echoed in his ear. Though Gag died miserably, he ultimately fulfilled his task of stalling for time. The bowstring tightly stretched, the bow bending almost to breaking point. A metal-glossed iron arrow was tightly clamped between Magi's fingers, the slightly purple arrowhead aimed directly at the bear goblin's head. Precise strike, a prerequisite for the ranger profession. Also, the only offensive battle skill Magi mastered in his adventure career over the years. In higher-level battles, this move's effect naturally lies mainly in the precise targeting of attack positions. But for low-level adventurers like Magi, the weak power bonus it provides, as deemed by higher-level professionals, is enough to handle most situations. Even faced with the bear goblin, known as a newbie killer, he held full expectations. If the arrow could penetrate the eye socket and enter the brain, it could instantly kill the bear goblin. If it hit the skull, the force accompanying the arrow would be enough to leave the bear goblin in a moribund state, with Magi having the capacity to finish it off. Even in the worst case where the arrow missed, the characteristic of the precise strike battle skill ensures a wound is left on the opponent. At that point, as Magi's trump card, the specially crafted metal arrowhead, for which he spent a lot of gold coins, could play its role. The horned viper venom smeared on its surface could quickly paralyze the bear goblin's body, greatly reducing its speed and slowing its reactions in a short time. By then, whether to pursue or turn and flee, the choice would be his. Complex thoughts flashed through his mind. Magi held his breath, aimed at the enemy's vital spot, and gently released his grip. Whoosh! The sound of the air breaking came from the front, the impact from the bowstring's rebound causing a numbing tremor from his fingertips to his forearm. At the moment the arrow flew, decades of experience in the jungle told him, this shot is on target. Under extreme pressure, the hunter performed at his best, executing almost every movement perfectly. A few strands of white hair by his temple swayed gently with the breeze brought by the arrow. Magi was utterly confident, seemingly able to hear the dull sound of the arrowhead penetrating the eye socket and embedding in the brain, hearing the bear goblin's abruptly ended agonizing scream. But then, a touch of reddish-brown appeared, shattering all his dreams like waking from a nightmare. As if sensing the imminent fatal strike on the bear goblin, a semi-transparent red-tinged shield appeared out of nowhere in the air before it. The material seemed neither light nor air, possibly some wandering energy temporarily drawn together, forming an unstable reddish-brown force field. The iron arrow, propelled by the hunter's full strength, slightly touched it, then skewed away under the reddish-brown energy's influence. The force remained, but the arrowhead's target shifted from the bear goblin's head to the wall behind it. Whoosh bam! The metallic arrow easily penetrated the cave's dirt-covered stone wall, leaving only the violent quiver of the tail feathers and the hunter's pale, despairing face. How? How can it be? Magi's bloodless lips quivered, his body trembling with fear. My arrow. And facing Hunter Magi, who had unveiled his last card, the bear goblin spoke for the first time since appearing in front of everyone. Your little tricks, spell. A coarse voice like gravel echoed faintly in the cave, the broken universal language making its meaning incomprehensible. But at this moment, what the bear goblin said no longer mattered, because in the next instant, its death-filled, ominous shadow was in front of Magi, engulfing him. It wasn't because he was disheartened, only seeking a quick death. Although his heart was full of despair, having been an adventurer for so many years, his mental resilience wasn't that weak. The current hunter was in some sort of stiffness where his body couldn't move. Precise strike is an exclusive skill of the ranger profession, which not only helps professionals to accurately lock onto an enemy's vitals in complex battlefield situations, but also slightly enhances the arrow's damage to some extent. As a battle skill, it naturally doesn't consume mana, but it still requires a certain physical fitness to support it. Normally, with a professional's physical fitness, this kind of physical exertion is very easy and can't be considered a burden at all. But for an ordinary person like Magi, who hasn't reached the professional level and doesn't have any professional foundational bonuses, the side effects of using Precise Strike are somewhat too severe. After using the battle skill each time, he needs to endure nearly 15 seconds of extreme weakness. In this state, Magi couldn't even walk without someone supporting him, let alone fight. Thus, in most cases, Precise Strike was always his last trump card. Now facing the bear goblin, a creature far beyond what their team could handle, the hunter chose to cooperate with his teammates and unleash his most powerful move at the beginning to seize the initiative in battle. This was completely understandable. And now, with the arrow missing its target due to some unknown force, the plan failed, and he lost the best opportunity, naturally tipping the scales of victory towards the enemy. Huff! The bear goblin Hunga snorted out a breath of white steam from its expanded nostrils. Ruined Hunga's lucky day. It mumbled, the yellow-brown murky eyes reflecting the frail human body standing motionless in front of it. Little bug, you need to compensate. A few months ago, its minions snatched a woman from who knows where. Hunga was very hungry and particularly fond of this food, called human, delicate and tender, much better tasting than the boars or flower rabbits in the forest. But newly independent from the tribe, it still remembered the teachings of the priest, who is said to have lived for 200 years. Keep the females for bearing children, eat after they give birth. So it just waited in the nest, not knowing how much saliva it had already drooled, until today, when that woman finally gave birth. But before it could get a taste, these little bugs appeared. You will be punished, Hunga wants. The smell of blood in the air filled its nostrils. The delightful taste made it lick its dry lips. Realizing something, Hunga's previously irritated face suddenly showed a hint of delight. Thinking this way, the bear goblin Hunga had already raised the nail-head hammer in its hand high. The arm as thick as a normal person's thigh bulged with muscles, the spikes covering the hammerhead glinting with a cold light in the fire's reflection. It swung the iron hammer down towards the little bug in front of it. And at this moment, buzz! A sharp silver-white light suddenly flashed through the dim cave. Vortex slash. The piercing wind stung the skin. Hunga only felt an icy chill come from the side of its neck. Instinctively, it turned its body sideways. The motion in its hand paused for a moment, causing the nail-head hammer, originally aimed at Magi's vitals, to shift and strike the opponent's right calf instead. Ah! The fragile human leg bone was instantly crushed by the metal hammer. Along with the knee, the entire right leg severely twisted and deformed. Magi cried out in pain, his pale face covered in cold sweat. But at this moment, no one in the field paid attention to him anymore. Xianan's eyes were fixed on the imposing figure ahead, feeling slightly regretful. As an ordinary person who hadn't even killed a chicken until yesterday, he felt he had done his utmost. In the 0.5 seconds after witnessing Gag's head being shattered by the bear goblin, a series of thoughts flashed through his mind. Realizing that the opponent was too powerful to confront directly, also aware that escaping was unrealistic due to the opponent's shown explosiveness, hence deciding to stealth attack when they hadn't noticed him yet. Xianan even patiently and precisely caught the brief moment when the bear goblin exerted to swing the hammer. However, he hadn't expected that this demon creature from a fantasy world could generate force a second time, to be able to control its body to dodge his attack while swinging the iron hammer. Things are bad now, Xianan murmured. The good news is he managed to wound the opponent, confirming that this non-human existence was still of flesh and blood, had health bars. Moreover, the strike he delivered didn't trigger the bear goblin's previously displayed energy shield, indicating it might be on some cooldown, or perhaps melee attacks don't trigger it at all. As for the bad news, first, having unleashed a third vortex slash in a short time, his body had reached its limit. Just gripping the sword's hilt, he could feel the muscles in his forearm trembling, as if straining slightly might result in cramping. Second, even though the sword struck the vital, the bear goblin's dodge significantly reduced its injury. This not only failed to effectively weaken the bear goblin's combat power, but also exposed his own presence in the enemy's sight, simultaneously attracting its aggression. Roar! An angry bear's roar erupted suddenly, deep and fierce, as if an invisible wave rushed through the air. Betrayed by the little bug, with a bloody gash at its neck, Hunga plunged into rage, gazing at the hulking figure barreling towards him like a flesh and blood tank. Xianan had no time to devise a strategy. Driven by the survival instinct, he suddenly dove to the side, clumsily rolling like a donkey. Bam! The black nail head hammer slammed down hard, grazing his head, spiderweb cracks spreading across the ground. Gusts of wind mixed with splattered earth stung his cheeks with pain, perhaps because of having died once in a previous life, or the adrenaline surge making him ignore those negative emotions. At this moment, facing the invincible opponent in front of him, Xianan felt no fear at all. He swiftly got back on his feet. The long sword in his hand swung again towards the opponent's neck. To some extent, this is indeed true. Overly strong and therefore bulky muscles can greatly hinder their flexibility, and body weight far exceeding the norm might also prevent them from being nimble. But all these assumptions come with a premise. That is, if the opponent is on the same power level as you. In modern society, this premise might not hold much importance, as there exists no supernatural power, and no matter how you train, you remain on the level of mortals. But in a fantasy world where earthly legends exist, saints walk among us, and gods and demons coexist, this becomes significantly important. Compared to the 18-year-old field boy Xianan, the bear goblins can be said to surpass him completely in every aspect except intelligence and farming. This even includes knowledge. It knows 2 languages, the goblin language and the universal language. Thus, even if Xianan, under the influence of adrenaline, temporarily forgets fear and immediately seizes the opportunity to launch an attack after dodging, the bear goblin Hunga still responds with ease. It doesn't even bother pulling out the nail head hammer already embedded in the ground. Facing the slashing sword, it merely swings its thick arm covered in brown fur with force. Bam! Xianan is sent flying back instantly. As if he collided head-on with a train, he only feels a massive force coming from his chest, causing his thoughts to halt, with extreme dizziness accompanied by intense pain almost dissipating his consciousness. Damn! He struggles to rise, his mouth filled with a strong metallic taste of blood. Meanwhile, Hunga's towering figure already stands in front of him. Disobedient bug, the bear goblin allows the shallow neck wound to bleed freely, its yellow-brown eyes filled with anger and shame, as if it had been bitten by a rabbit about to be served on the table. Hunga wants to eat you alive. The bear goblin tribe hasn't developed the concept of torture. With their primitive understanding, letting prey watch themselves be eaten alive is considered the cruelest act. For this purpose, a priest in the tribe even found a plant that enables prey to remain conscious despite severe injury. Of course, Hunga doesn't have the resources or advanced cooking skills right now. Therefore, Xianan might still die a swift death. With matters having come to this point, looking at the bear goblin gradually closing in, further affirming the vast gap in power, he had no thoughts of pleading. On one hand, he did not believe that the opponent's moral level would allow magnanimity. On the other hand, Xianan noticed, not far from bear goblin's side, Hunter Magi, whose calf was recently shattered, painfully howling, was leaning against the wall to slowly sit up, his right hand clutching the longbow, his left reaching for the quiver. Their gazes touched briefly and then parted. Although they hadn't spent much time together, nor developed any tacit understanding, at that moment, Xianan instinctively interpreted the meaning hidden in the other's gaze. Stall for time, distract the enemy. His brain working rapidly, he opened his mouth and said, "Hey, doing it this way won't make it taste good." Noticing the little bug speaking, Hunga, still holding the raised hammer, paused. "No. Humans taste good. If you want to eat raw without cooking, I recommend trying a marinating method." Seeing the curiosity piqued by his words, Xianan ignored his own rambling, spouting nonsense. "You can first wash me clean in a basin, then add refined salt for sterilization and flavor. Mix for 5 minutes, and then add ginger, garlic, chili, and soy sauce. Seal it up, and wait for 30 minutes. The taste, seeing Hunga grow impatient due to his randomly concocted steps, Xianan quickly shifted the focus to flavor. Sweet and fresh. While ensuring my original flavor, you can also savor the tangy, spicy flavor of the seasoning, quite appetizing. Sweet? Spicy, what do they taste like? Hunga held up the nail head hammer, still not striking, instead asking with some curiosity. But after all, it is a bear goblin, not an even more meat-obsessed and single-minded ogre. Little bug, trying to deceive me, damn it. It suddenly stepped forward 2 paces, the muscles in its right arm holding the nail hammer swelling, as if it would crush the annoying little bug below into meat paste at any second. And at that moment, Magi finally readied himself once more, bending the bow and drawing an arrow, charging up and aiming. Whoosh! The familiar sound of metal whistling through the air rang out again. Compared to before, the distance between him and the bear goblin was shorter this time, meaning that no matter its reflexes, which exceeded ordinary humans, it would be hard to dodge. And the energy barrier, which could almost become every shooter's nightmare, did not appear. Thus, swoosh, blood splattered. Magi, whose calf had been smashed, almost leaned against the cave's stone wall, shooting the arrow while seated on the ground. Though still precise due to the battle skill, the power was considerably less. Therefore, even though the metal arrow almost instantly pierced the right eye of the bear goblin, who turned because of the noise, only a small portion of the arrowhead entered its eye socket. The toxin with paralyzing effects quickly spread inward from the wound. Seriously injured, but not fatal. And in facing this last opportunity to seize a chance at life, Xia-Nen did not flinch. Just as the bear goblin howled in intense pain from its pierced eyeball, he tightly gripped the one-handed sword in his palms, enduring the indescribable soreness from his arm muscles tearing, forcibly executing the fourth vortex slash of the day. A cold light flickered. The brownish fur had no resistance against the sharp blade. The leathery thick skin was the first barrier, slightly sluggish. The accumulated fat was like the muddy water in a swamp, the blade still smooth, yet the force being invisibly drained. The rock-hard, solid muscles almost absorbed all the sharpness the long sword carried, but still were arduously breached under the vortex slash's enhancement. Then, the blade pierced through the fur and flesh, meeting the hardest defensive line within a creature. The bones. Crack. No longer passing through the hands of those rookie adventurers, the battle-tested one-handed sword finally met its due conclusion. In an intense encounter worthy of being etched into its combat history, it broke apart. The sudden emptiness from the broken sword in his hand made it hard to unleash the pent-up force. Xia-Nen watched as the cracks spread on the sword blade and gradually expanded. Then, owing to the inertia from the vortex slash, his whole body flew out diagonally. Roar! Howling madly, the unprecedented intense pain made the bear-like, sturdy beast completely lose its remaining sanity. Along with its eyeball, it pulled the arrow directly out of its eye socket, and the crimson blood that followed stained its body like a waterfall, adding more brutality. Facing this enraged beast, a weakened hunter who suffered a crippled leg, plus a novice adventurer exhausted physically and with destroyed weapon. The outcome for the stinky fish and shrimp group seemed evident. Magi's face was filled with despair. The second use of precise strike had plunged his body into a paralyzed state from overloading. It felt like every muscle strand was twitching, spasming, unable to summon even a trace of strength. His gaze was hollow, lost in some thought, perhaps regretting the greed that drove him into this cave, or hating himself for not learning from past mistakes, for not being more cautious. Of course, he might also be reminiscing about the girl with a smile who looked at him under the white oak tree in his hometown. Unexpectedly, unlike Hunter Magi, who had completely lost hope for life, Xia-Nen, whose body was also on the brink of collapse, had a rather complex expression on his face. Yes, complex. It's like when playing mahjong in a past life, holding a lousy hand planning to defend and finish the round, yet unexpectedly it becomes a winning hand right before the round ends, spending thousands in a game without getting a rare item, but on the last draw before quitting, getting an SSR from a complimentary draw. It's a weird mix of relief, surprise, and grievance that says, "Why the hell didn't you come sooner?" Because, as he performed the vortex slash, swinging that sword, a cascade of translucent characters flashed across his eyes like a spam chat. Skill level +1. Vortex slash LV4, 100-100. Vortex slash LV5 max. Strength +1. Agility +1. Specialty Chopping Master unlocked. Chopping Master. Category, Specialty. Effect, chopping damage +5%. Introduction. Day after day of practice has gradually revealed to you the mysteries hidden between the blades. Back in the day, I wielded this sword, slashing my way from the heavenly realm mountain to the 9 layers of hell. 5 years and 6 months back and forth, not a blink. Ragnarok, the 35th contractor of extinguishing Endsword, the abandoned one Julius. Note 2. Sweat will not betray you. Stone Saint, a legendary martial monk of the Legia sect, Yongwu. Faced with a life-and-death crisis, Xiaonan had no opportunity to carefully examine these messages. He just glanced over them and learned that in the recent battle, he had gained the last bit of skill level for Vortex Slash, raising it to LV5 full level, resulting in a series of enhancements. Soon, an inexplicable power surged from deep within his body, like a fountain swiftly spreading throughout his entire being. His fatigued muscles relaxed as if soaking in a hot spring. His previously slightly flabby frame instantaneously became firm, with strength and explosiveness significantly enhanced. The ground beneath his feet seemed to suddenly become soft. His shoes felt as if fitted with springs, nimble and light. It was as if he had swapped his body. All previous exhaustion and pain vanished in an instant. Xiaonan lifted his head, his dark eyes focusing on the ferocious figure charging straight towards him with a roar. He tossed aside the one-handed sword in his hand that was now just a hilt. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of silver white and turned for a quick glance. Gag's corpse was lying on the ground, and his half-human-hide dual-handed axe was stuck in the ground beside his feet. As his thoughts drifted, a decision had already formed in his mind. The bear, Goblin Hunga, due to grievous injuries, had completely succumbed to an uncontrollable berserk state, controlled by an endless desire for destruction. Even if one of its already deceased goblin minions stood before it, it would tear them to shreds mercilessly. In this state, it naturally wouldn't realize what transformation had happened to the seemingly weak human youth before it. Hunga simply, instinctively repeated its countless hunting steps from over the past decade. Charge, aim at the prey, raise the nail hammer, smash. Buzz, a silver-white streak, even purer and more fleeting than before, flashed through the dim cave. It signified further enhanced explosiveness and a more refined technique. With Vortex Slash upgraded to LV5 full level, Xiaonan fully mastered all aspects of this move. How to unleash maximum power with the least stamina usage, from what angle to strike for maximum damage, the most appropriate timing. It almost became a part of his body. And the 5% boost from Chopping Master, although seemingly small, added real damage increase to every attack without any restriction. Not to mention the crucial 2 valuable attribute points gained in strength and agility. Muscle power and physical potential, reaction speed and agility. From 5 to 6 was not merely a 20% increase in numbers, but more complex, multidimensional growth involving various aspects. Combined, in just a few seconds, Xiaonan's combat power advanced several tiers. Based on this, the power unleashed by the Vortex Slash also underwent a qualitative change. The once incredibly heavy dual-handed axe now felt quite handy with his body enhanced. A surge of abundant power rose from beneath his legs, quickly converging and transmitting. The axe blade swung upwards diagonally, gathering all the strength in his body to a single point, then burst forth. Roar! A fetid, bloody odor assaulted him, while the shadow of the nail-head hammer raised high covered him. Xiaonan could even clearly see the bear goblin's yellow-brown turbid eyes filled with bloodshot threads, and feel the air waves slightly vibrating from its roar. But that's all there was to it, because in the next second, his hand felt the familiar, gradually accustomed through many battles, resistance of a blade slicing through flesh. For a meat bone, what had just barred his already broken sword blade was effortlessly breached. After a momentary pause, came an incredibly smooth and satisfying sensation. The axe blade propelled Xiaonan's body, completing a 180-degree rotation. Sizzling, the bear goblin's massive head spun and flew off from the place it ought to have stayed, its face still maintaining a roar expression. The iron hammer hit the ground, Scarlet, hot blood gushed like a fountain as the burly body collapsed. The heavy dual-handed axe fell directly to the ground, the metallic axe blade colliding with the cave floor, making a crisp sound. Huff! Xiaonan gasped for breath. The formidable enemy was dead, and the exhaustion and pain that had been suppressed by intense focus surged like a tide. Even though leveling up brought him a 2-point increase in attributes, it couldn't change the fact that his body was completely exhausted. Using the burst brought by the attribute points to unleash full power and kill the bear goblin was already his limit. If another monster of the same strength were to appear at this moment, in his current state, he wouldn't have any chance of winning. Spitting out a mouthful of bloody phlegm, he touched his own chest. That's where he was hit by the bear goblin's arm during the fight. The pain lingered on the flesh and was gradually diminishing with time. It shouldn't have hurt the bone, right? Xiaonan thought with relief. Otherwise, given this world's medieval level of technology, he wouldn't know how to treat it. Then he thought, after all, in a fantasy world with supernatural powers, perhaps there is some kind of scroll that records healing magic, or maybe a priest who can wield the holy light. Xiaonan, a weak and powerless call suddenly came to his ears. Just freed from the battle state, Xiaonan finally realized that there was another person alive besides himself on the scene. At this moment, Magi looked particularly miserable. One calf was shattered, bone fragments piercing out, with a knee barely holding onto the flesh, resembling the crude joints of a cheap market puppet. His face was deathly pale, lips bloodless, and if not for the glimmer of spirit in his eyes and the subtle tremor from intense pain, he could be mistaken for one of the goblin corpses lying nearby. In my pouch, red potion, help me. Almost like even his consciousness was fading, Magi said with difficulty and intermittently. He was the only remaining official member of the Stinky Fish and Shrimp group, a comrade in the deadly battle, the only old hunter who knew the way out of the mist forest. As someone who received higher education, with relatively normal values and a certain level of morality in the modern world, from any angle, Xiaonan couldn't ignore and let him die. So he crouched down, and according to Magi's indication, fished out a small bottle from his waist pouch. It was made of glass, resembling a test tube from a lab, with a dark brown wooden stopper on top. Inside, about a third was filled with a red liquid, obviously used many times before and faintly glowing when shaken vigorously. Even though the other hadn't specified exactly what it was, its intense familiarity allowed Xiaonan to guess its basic purpose with just a look. Life potion. Xiaonan pulled out the wooden stopper from the glass bottle for Magi, orally or externally. Drink, Magi nodded, opening his mouth. All of it. Upon hearing this, Xiaonan asked no further questions, pouring all the life potion into the other's mouth. He wasn't sure if he saw wrong, but he vaguely sensed a bit of heartache in Magi's eyes, as if this staple resource, widely distributed in various games and novels of the previous life, was incredibly precious. And right after that, Xiaonan understood the reason for such an expression from him. Just as Magi's Adam's apple moved and the potion entered his belly in the next second, his originally blood-drained face turned rosy, and the focus in his pupils reassembled. The wounds stopped bleeding, and the chest that had been heaving violently due to difficulty in breathing gradually calmed. It was like a miraculous effect, akin to shooting a movie. And just when Xiaonan thought that Magi could revive fully with this half bottle of potion, everything ceased suddenly. The broken bones did not realign, and the calf remained twisted. Clearly, Although this life potion had effects exceeding his expectations, it hadn't reached the level of regenerating severed limbs. Roughly, it could heal most minor injuries and alleviate severe ones. All right. After drinking the potion, Magi breathed heavily in the dank air of the cave, like a drowning man finally breaking the surface. Thank you. Thank you. Although his face was still covered in sweat from the pain, his voice was no longer weak. You go clean up the battlefield. He pulled out a few rolls of bandages from his pouch. I'll manage the rest myself. According to the adventurer's unwritten rules Magi had previously told him about, when cleaning the battlefield, aside from parts like goblin ears which have clear ownership, all other gains belong to the finder. By telling him to clean the battlefield, it practically signified the spoils in the goblin nest belonged to Xianan. Though he knew in his heart that without those 2 arrows from Magi earlier, even if he broke through in the battle, he might not be the match for the bear goblin. But since the other had explicitly stated it, he wouldn't be overly modest there. Nodding slightly at Magi, he then walked to the other side of the cave. Unlike in games where a treasure chest would automatically appear after you finish a dungeon, or where you could click the mouse to loot piles of items from monster corpses, collecting spoils in the real world is much more troublesome. First, regarding those goblin corpses. Bounty is only for adult individuals, so he mercilessly sent 5 green-skinned youngsters to meet their beastly father. Skillfully stepping on the heads, he cut off the left ears of 4 goblins one by one, putting them into the bag behind him. Then came the meticulous scavenging. The cave wasn't large, its interior setup almost completely visible, but with a mindset to maximize gains, Xianan still searched thoroughly with a torch, and had some findings. Eliminating those inconvenient to carry and of no value. Here are the spoils he gathered from the goblin nest. 3 striped light green opaque gemstones, a slightly damp and moldy wooden small round shield, and a small pouch of coins felt the weight, mostly silver and copper coins. I wonder if these stones are worth anything. Xianan pondered to himself. Meanwhile, Magi had also finished treating his wounds. So, have you wrapped it up? He leaned against the wall, struggling a bit to stand up. The leg that was twisted out of shape was now simply fixed with wooden sticks and bandages, still difficult to move, but not worsening the injury. Pretty much searched twice. Xianan replied. Twice? You missed the most important thing. Magi's gaze carried a bit of amusement, gesturing towards the bear goblin's corpse. In such cases, the Adventurer Association naturally lists such demons on their bounty board, offering a decent reward due to their prowess far surpassing low-level adventurers. 10 gold coins. It's not much, but if you add in the loot from clearing out an entire goblin tribe, the haul can barely be considered substantial. The bear goblin that the stinky fish and shrimp group encountered had evidently just left its tribe recently, as even its underlings' equipment wasn't fully gathered. Even counting the dozen goblins ambushed yesterday, the only weapon that could fetch a decent price from the whole tribe was the nail-head hammer in the bear goblin's hand. Xianan tried it out. Even for his enhanced physique, it was a bit heavy. Though it looked intimidating when swung, the weapon was probably not suitable for a vortex slash and could most likely only be sold to a blacksmith shop. But fortunately, perhaps because this was his first adventure, he had some sort of legendary beginner's luck. on the bear goblin's body. There might exist something that low-level adventurers like them could only gaze at from afar through store or auction house windows. The ochre-colored energy shield. In most cases, bear goblins do not possess magical abilities. Only a very few individuals favored by the divine, referred to as priests within their tribe, can master some primitive totemic class magic. Clearly, the bear goblin Hunga, which Xianan had beheaded, was not such an existence. Otherwise, as soon as they reached the depths of a lair, the stinky fish and shrimp group would have been wiped out, at least according to Magi. On the other hand, during the brief yet intense battle just now, the bear goblin did not make any obvious moves to use a magic scroll. Therefore, only one possibility remains: magic items. And that indeed was the case. Under Magi's guidance, Xianan found a ring in the bear goblin's pants pocket. Deadline. Type ring. Level. Good green. Effect. 1. Deflection field. Active/level 2. Summon a chaotic field to block the next physical attack from an enemy. Description. On the night before the deadline, Noel finally remembered the assignment left by his tutor. Note, my efficiency has always been high. Outstanding graduate of the Starsea Enchantment Academy. Riemann, Mage Tower's best apprentice of the year, Noel. The ring is completely silver-white, seemingly no different from the ordinary silver rings on a common person's hand. But upon closer inspection, a few inconspicuous patterns are discernible inside, occasionally flashing with ochre light on its surface. That's it. When Xianan retrieved Deadline from the bear goblin's pants pocket, Magi instantly became excited. This ring is definitely a magic item. The expression on his face was something Xianan had never seen since joining the team, and it repelled my precise strike so effortlessly, indicating it's quite powerful. He asserted confidently, "It's definitely not some trick. At least a level 1 spell is enchanted on it." Magi took the ring from Xianan's hand, examining it with the care of a treasured possession, as if even his ailments vanished at that moment. Xianan wasn't as excited about it as the other, without any unnecessary thoughts in his heart, until he suggested leaving while Magi was studying the ring, after searching the cave once more. Xianan keenly noticed that there seemed to be a change in the other's expression. Magi's previously excited face suddenly cooled at a certain moment. His gaze lowered, glancing at his nearly crippled right leg, then quickly retracted. He put on a somewhat stiff, gentle smile again, pretending nonchalance while reluctantly handing the ring back to Xianan. "It's time to leave. The smell of blood here is too strong, likely to attract other beasts," he said thus. In his past life, Xianan wasn't very old, but he'd been muddling through the workplace for nearly 10 years, barely achieving some results. He understood basic observation and discernment. So, although he didn't reveal anything on the surface, he noted the shift in Magi's expression at that moment. Leaving the cave, Magi was severely injured, making movement inconvenient. Xianan was carrying many spoils, also making walking difficult. Thus, their pace wasn't fast. Fortunately, with professional skills and familiarity with the route, the team continued in the right direction. No longer needing to change course continuously to track goblin traces as they did coming in, they only had to focus on walking out. So, within just a day and a half, they reached the outer edge of the forest. The previously subtle atmosphere seemed to dissolve in the white mist, faced with a high-pressure environment filled with danger in Mist Forest. Creak. Leather boots softly fell on the ground over the fallen leaves, making a sound as they stepped on scattered branches. "The traces of human presence around here are increasing. We must be nearing the forest edge," Magi said, pressing close to a tree trunk, nostrils flaring. "We should be able to return to the city by tomorrow night at the latest." "That's good then." He placed the burden on his back heavily on the ground, letting the dual-handed axe from Gag in his hand stand against a nearby tree, while removing the nail-head hammer tied to his waist. "Day in, day out, it's nothing but wooden grass. My eyes are going blurry." "Haha, you'll get used to it," Magi replied with a laugh, looking up at the sky. "It's getting late." let's set up camp first. The campfire was quickly lit. The two sat around the flames, eating the simple food they carried with them, a piece of hard black bread, a few strips of overly salty, unspecified animal meat, chatting casually. "So, have you made up your mind?" Magi asked sincerely, looking at Xian across from him, invitingly. "Want to join my team? Let's talk about it after we return to the city. You'll probably need some time to recuperate, too." Xiaonan glanced at the other's bandaged right leg, answering, "Haha, no need to worry." Magi waved his hand, pretending to be hearty. "I've had worse injuries than this. Don't worry. Several trips to the church, and I'll be fine in no time." Xiaonan nodded, remaining silent. "All right, it's been a whole day. It's tough on you carrying so much stuff." Magi stood up with some difficulty, patting the dust off his backside. "I'll go check the traps, but being near the gathering place, there shouldn't be any danger. You can have a good rest today. Leave the first half of the night watch to me." Xiaonan squinted his eyes, watching the other's figure gradually disappear into the shrubbery. In the elf royal city of Ivlius, the night is an elegant poem played by harps and leaf flutes, while in the steel barrier's melted steel city, the night is filled with blood, iron, and smoke. The deep night of the mist forest is very quiet. The chirping of insects and cries of beasts are present, but unlike other desolate wildernesses, the sound is very faint, indistinct. Even though it's right by your ears, it seems as if it's separated by a veil, difficult to hear clearly. It's as if even the sounds dissolve into the thin mist pervading the air. Magi sat alone by the campfire, gently cleaning the longbow. It was his old friend of nearly 20 years. Even though countless memories of the past have turned gray like his life, he still remembers, 20 years ago, on the morning of his 18th birthday, his father, who was always as silent as a mountain, chopped down the white oak tree that accompanied him growing up in the yard, and used the essence of it to make this longbow for him. To be honest, it doesn't have anything special. The bow limb is supple but lacks hardness, the grip feels rough, and the string groove isn't polished carefully enough. From any angle, it can't compare to the fine goods on store shelves. But just like the countless afternoons of napping under the white oak tree as a child, the gentle, refreshing breeze, and the rustling sound of swaying branches and leaves, the longbow seems to merge with his body, handy and intimate. If it weren't for that luxurious carriage slowly driving into the village, perhaps today he would still be roaming the endless mountains with his old friend. The orange-red flames reflected on Magi's weathered face, shrouded in shadows, obscuring his specific expression. His right leg, tightly bound with bandages, still ached faintly, and his arm was numb from overusing battle skills. He raised his head, glancing at the pitch-black night sky. Taking a deep breath, his gaze swept past the pine tree, standing by the camp. The nail-head hammer brought from the goblin cave lay quietly among the fallen leaves, and the dual-handed axe from another deceased teammate leaned steadily against the trunk. Speaking of which, the half-orc named Gag was somewhat ill-tempered, but after getting familiar with him, he was actually... Forget it. Magi shook his head. Late night always tended to stir emotions. Now, it's time to get down to business. Looking towards the other side of the camp, across the blazing campfire, a figure lay there motionless, the sound of calm, long breaths faintly coming through the air. There was no hesitation in Magi's eyes. He had long since made up his mind. "Don't blame me, boy." Without standing up, he maintained his cross-legged position on the ground. The wooden longbow quietly stood upright, the bowstring drawn back, and the arrow's feathers trembled slightly in the air. At such a close distance, Magi naturally couldn't possibly make a mistake. With just a gentle release, the sharp arrowhead could take away the young life in front of him. "This is how adventurers are. You must know that," he murmured in his heart. And it was at that moment, Magi suddenly saw Xian'an's eyelids tremble slightly. Open eyes, clear and bright eyes, definitely not the drowsy state of someone just waking up. Realized, he was surprised, but his fingertips were already releasing the arrow shaft. Whoosh! Tom seemed to stagnate at this moment. The slender and sharp arrow stirred the thin mist, causing faint air currents under the moonlight. Passing over the campfire, the rising and entangled flames were influenced by the air current, climbing upward like the tentacles of a demon from purgatory, yet firmly bound by the invisible gravitational pull in the heart of the flames. Air, blanket, fine grass, soil. The arrow pierced through the blanket, straight into the ground, without any sound of penetrating flesh. Did it miss? No, that should have been where Xian'an's head was when he slept. But the newbie adventurer, who was on guard, had dodged and counterattacked after confirming the other's movement. The appearance of side-sleeping was actually the position easiest for exerting force. The blanket covering him was suddenly flipped, blocking the other's view, but when it fell, Xian'an's figure was already gone. The sound of an object moving came from the air. Boom! The campfire was suddenly kicked over, and in his vision were flying sparks and heavy wooden blocks wrapped in flames. Then, there were two fleeting arcs of silver light. Vortex slash. The firewood was sliced apart, sparks splashed everywhere. The sharp blade entered the body and cut out from the other side. The broken longbow fell to the ground. Gasp! Gasp! Xian'an stood on the grass. In front of him was Magi, clutching his throat with both hands. With his windpipe severed, he couldn't speak. Only the blood kept flowing through his fingers. The night was deep, and Xian'an couldn't capture Magi's expression at that moment. He only saw the other opening his eyes wider and wider until they lost their luster, and the twitching body that finally fell backward. Kneeling down, confirming the other was completely dead, Xian'an finally breathed a sigh of relief, putting the two daggers from the dwarf Elky back at his waist. It wasn't just a matter of luck. Back in the cave 2 days ago, the moment he noticed the change in Magi's demeanor, he had heightened his vigilance in secret. Even though it was his first mission, the behavior of the stinky fish and shrimp group, which fit the stereotype of low-level adventurers, had been deeply imprinted on his mind. One cannot be too wary, even if it was a teammate who had just gone through a fierce battle together. But Xian'an didn't take the initiative to strike. After all, until just now, the other had shown no hostility, even seriously inviting him into their team. Thankfully, his timely realization of caution helped him avoid this sudden crisis. Compared to the mental energy consumed previously, the battle process between the two was very simple. Injured Magi only had one chance to shoot, and it had to be when both of them had reached the edge of the mist forest, where with his current physical state, he could return to town smoothly to make a move. And Xian'an, who retained most of his combat strength, only needed one slash to deal with the other. The sky was faintly bright. Without further concern for the other's body, Xian'an, referring to the battlefield cleaning skills he had learned from the others along the way, quickly packed the supplies and luggage in the camp. There was little useful equipment on Magi, and the only weapon, the wooden bow, had been cut in the battle, unlikely to sell for much. Therefore, Xian'an just took the arrow quiver, extinguished the fire, and hurried away. A cool breeze blew, the sound of swaying branches, the Sasha sound echoed through the forest. Magi leaned against the tree with his eyes closed, clutching the broken wooden bow made from white oak. At that moment, it seemed as if he had returned to that long-ago sunny afternoon, the dappled shade of the trees. The cold of the early morning, the mist in the air exhaled like white smoke with each breath. Nail, head hammer, dual-handed axe, and 2 daggers at the waist. Xiaonan carried the heavy burden on his back, vaguely feeling a bit tired. But thinking of the potential prices they might fetch upon returning to town, he secretly steeled himself. This trip was much more lucrative than farming at home. Sunlight pierced through the gaps between the treetops, casting spots of light on the verdant meadow. Walking mechanically, Xianan's thoughts began to drift. Regarding the now-deceased Magi, he felt the other party didn't deserve such a fate. Even though he had absorbed 18 years of memories from the former self, the one controlling this body was truly a soul from a modern civilized society in the other world. It wasn't about putting on airs. Xianan felt that Magi didn't need to pretend to be generous like that, just needed to clearly and openly state his requests, and any issues could be discussed slowly. After all, bear goblins were slain by the 2 of them together. Magi's 2 arrows played crucial roles by activating the deflection field cooldown of the deadline ring and piercing the enemy's eye, paralyzing it. Only then did he have the opportunity to utilize his upgraded and enhanced body to kill. Magi's contributions were indispensable. In such circumstances, as long as Magi asked frankly, even if he wanted that enchanted ring, as long as it covered Xianan's rightful share, he was fine with it. In his view, being able to reap such rewards on his first adventure trip meant that following an experienced adventurer like Magi on future missions would likely yield decent returns. Upon reviewing everything again, Xianan realized he had made 2 mistakes. First, his mindset had not yet adjusted. Though he had crossed over to the other world, he instinctively applied his former life's thoughts and worldview to everything around him. Perhaps he should be more grounded? The second mistake was assuming things without a concrete understanding of matters related to adventuring. It took someone like Magi, a veteran hunter, to venture alone. It seems in this world, or at least among low-level adventurers like them, magic items are far more precious than he imagined. As time passed, the mist dissipated. The temperature in the air gradually rose, and the dense forest in his sight became sparser, revealing small paths opened by humans now and then. Chimney smoke curled upwards. A few medieval-style brick houses came into Xianan's view. Crystal-clear streams meandered along, with several women dressed like farm wives squatting by the side, washing clothes and letting out occasional laughter. 2 young children played by the roadside, one wielding a simple wooden sword, with a serious face full of righteousness. The other pretended to be a monstrous creature, flailing wildly. Having stayed in the mist forest for so long, away from civilization, Xianan felt his previously tense mind relax seeing this scene full of life. The town had the only adventurer association in the vicinity, and people living nearby evidently weren't unfamiliar with adventurers. Seeing Xianan alone, burdened with large packages and walking along the country path, the 2 children seemed curious but didn't approach, probably being warned by their parents, only watching him from afar with wide eyes. Xianan, having just left the high-pressure environment filled with danger in the mist forest, felt a bit relaxed for a moment. Seeing the children so thin and appearing malnourished from not having enough to eat, he pulled out a piece of dried meat from his pocket, broke it into 2 halves, and motioned them over. When the children saw the dried meat in Xianan's hand, their eyes lit up, and they quickly ran over. Watching them devour hungrily, Xianan gently patted one of their heads and casually asked, "What are your names?" "Mosi." "Fei." Xianan nodded, about to speak when he heard a rushed and worried voice coming from behind. Sir, I'm sorry." Turning around, he saw a woman in an apron with blonde hair, probably not yet 30, with a buxom figure, freckles on both cheeks, 2 braids dangling over her shoulders, looking plain and simple. She should be the mother of the 2 children. Once she appeared, they both ran to her. "Didn't I tell you not to talk too much with this gentleman?" "But Mom, the meat." "No matter about the meat or sweet cake. Be obedient." The deliberately lowered voice carried through the air, and Xianan's previously joyful mood from leaving the mist forest started to cool. Noticing him looking at her, The woman quickly pulled her children behind her, ignoring the sweat running down her face from running all the way, repeatedly bowing to apologize. "I'm sorry, sir, really sorry." Glancing at the two boys behind her looking as if they had committed a great wrong, remaining silent, Xiaonan felt suddenly uninterested in speaking. He waved his hand, turned around, and left. Meanwhile, not far from Xiaonan, inside a residential building with closed doors and windows. "What do you think, big brother? Should we act?" A bulky man with a somewhat vacant look crouched awkwardly below the window sill, sneakily asking. "No rush. Let's observe first." The response came from a fierce-looking man with a buzz cut. "What are we waiting for?" "I saw him alone." The bulky man seemed anxious. "He's got a hammer, an axe, surely carrying valuable things. If we don't act, someone else might." He even took up a pitchfork lying on the ground beside him, as if ready to rush out. His reply was a slap to the back of the head. "You do realize he's carrying weapons, right?" The buzz-cut man whispered fiercely. "Someone strolling out of Mist Forest alone, without much injury. Really think he's easy prey? Everything good falls into your lap. Huh." Saying this, the buzz-cut man felt increasingly confident in his assumption. Unable to resist, he leaned against the wall, peeking through the window seam, pridefully whispering to his ally. "Look, all the adventurers we usually encounter are in groups. Even if someone's alone, they're all wounded, barely escaping alive from the forest. Like him, boldly walking in the middle of the road, carrying so much stuff without fear. How many have you seen?" "Indeed, never seen any." The bulky man scratched his head. "So, big brother, what should we do next?" The buzz-cut man shot another cautious glance outside, then withdrew his gaze. "The lad looks young, might have some tricks, not easy to handle. Let's forget this one. We'll wait a couple of days for a suitable target. We're leaving anyway, just one strike, get it over with. These adventurers die in droves yearly. Chuck the corpse into the forest, who would know? Big brother, I'll follow you." Located inland, far from the sea, the few rivers nearby are blocked by mountains, making it difficult to develop maritime trade. In addition, there are no special products here, and the terrain is complex with difficult paths, so no legitimate merchants would consider this a transit point. Usually, this small human settlement would remain as unknown as the countless villages within the kingdom's domain. Forget about the kingdom's history or epic heroes. Even if it were completely overrun due to war with neighboring countries or a demon invasion, it would probably only be mentioned briefly by some responsible official at the weekly council meeting. But right now, it is one of the important towns in the southern part of Panyan province. The reason is actually quite simple. Mist Forest, the perpetual gray-white mist within the forest, is not a peculiar natural phenomenon, but is caused by an excessive abundance of magic power in the air. Although many powerful demons that threaten human life have emerged from this, countless precious magic potions and secret realms have also appeared as a result, attracting waves of professionals to venture here. With this as a premise, River Valley Town, surrounded by mountains on three sides and easy to defend, naturally became the top choice for adventurers to prepare and rest. The Adventurer Association branch established here many years ago has further attracted adventurers from the southeastern border of the kingdom like a landmark. Just like the university cities centered around multiple higher education institutions in the previous world, were the numerous industries supporting tourist spots nearby. River Valley Town also has such a bustling street dedicated to serving adventurers. Bang! A middle-aged man, drunk beyond measure and spewing obscenities, was thrown onto the street by two guards in leather armor. The scent of alcohol mingled with noise flowed out from the half-open wooden door. On the street, a richly dressed plump woman clutched a zircon necklace, arguing fiercely with a vendor in front of her. The small boy beside her curiously watched the burly men in the roadside blacksmith shop sweating profusely. "Hey there, young man, come and play." A sickly, sweet feminine voice came from beside his ear. Looking around, he saw two scantily clad, voluptuous women leaning against a wall, beckoning to him with inviting gestures. Xiaonan wasn't shy either, smiling and nodding in greeting. Apparently considered a potential customer, his response immediately triggered a flurry of flirtatious chattering. But he had no intention of approaching and continued walking along the main road. Seeing this, the women also felt bored and turned to solicit other passers-by. As he gradually moved away, the intense scent of perfume slowly dissipated from the air. Xiaonan tightened the backpack on his back, his gaze calm. To say he had no thoughts would be impossible. After all, this body was in the most energetic period of human life, if not for the memories from his past life in a modern society flooded with information from the internet. The original owner of this body, who grew up in the fields and had barely seen a few peers of the opposite sex, was so simple. Meeting those service industry elites, just now, a simple gesture from others could have already captured his soul. He had just crossed into this world not long ago and hadn't even settled down, so naturally he couldn't think about these things. Instead, he was more curious whether this world also had the same unspeakable diseases as in his previous life, and under the existence of supernatural powers, whether people's preventive measures were the same as in his world. I wonder if healing potions would work. Having left the dangerous environment, everything in this other world piqued his immense curiosity. Even a random food stall by the roadside could set his thoughts wandering. Walking and stopping like this, about 20 minutes passed. Finally, Xiaonan arrived at his destination. It was a building of unique style, 4 stories high, not particularly eye-catching on this street. Yet it seemed to be the center of the entire area, bustling with people. Different from the brick houses seen all along, the building was made entirely of some kind of dark wood, its intricate wood grain naturally forming its distinctive decor, with clusters of green tree branches even decorating the eaves. From a distance, it looked like a massive treehouse. For some reason, standing at the entrance, Xiaonan felt a vague sense of returning to Mist Forest. The building itself had no sign, but just observing the adventurers coming and going at its entrance was enough to know its name. Adventurer Association, River Valley Town Branch. Xiaonan shook his head to rid himself of the unnecessary thoughts. He entered the main door. What came into view was a particularly spacious hall, its decor equally natural and filled with the atmosphere of a forest, with adventurers of all kinds passing by in front of him. Based on the memories left by the former self, he searched among the crowd, finally stopping at a counter-like position on the right side of the hall. Inside the counter sat a short-haired girl dressed in association work attire, possessing pleasant features yet appearing utterly listless. Seemingly working, but with her eyes half closed, as if on the verge of dozing off in the next moment. Xiaonan stepped forward and placed a coarse cloth bag packed with goblin and bear goblin's ears onto the counter. "Hello, I'd like to submit a task." The short-haired girl raised her eyelids slightly, not touching the bag, and her lips moved. "Group badge." Oh. Xiaonan immediately reacted, retrieving a palm-sized black iron plate from his chest and handed it to her. This was the identification of the Magi small group distributed by the association, with the group's number recorded on it. The front desk staff needed this number to find the tasks the group had taken. Fortunately, he remembered to bring this small piece from the battlefield cleanup. Otherwise, he would suffer a big loss this time. Mountain bow. Yes. Upon hearing this, Xiaonan couldn't help but be taken aback, then realized that Mountain Bow was the Magi's small group's official registered name. Having called it Stinky Fish and Shrimp Group so often in his mind, it nearly slipped by without recognition. In response, the short-haired girl simply glanced at him, showing no intention of questioning why other team members weren't present, as if this sort of thing was commonplace. The counter was slightly elevated, preventing Xiaonan from seeing the girl's operation clearly. Although he was a bit curious about how this world, technologically undeveloped yet possessing supernatural powers, handled tasks that would require flipping through a lot of files, he maintained his patience nonetheless. He merely watched as the short-haired girl's hands moved a few times in his blind spot, mumbling a few unknown characters. Bang! In no more than 5 seconds, a money pouch was tossed onto the counter in front of Xiaonan. Task number 701. Reward 30 gold coins. Adding it up, a total of 47 gold coins and 4 silver coins. The short-haired girl's monotonous voice reached his ears as Xiaonan weighed the heavy pouch in his hand. He felt an overwhelming sense of achievement rising from his heart. He slightly opened the pouch, glanced at the shiny gold inside, and couldn't help but grin. He didn't count the gold coins on the spot. On one hand, the Adventurer Association spanned the entire Afala continent, undoubtedly a giant entity, unlikely to shortchange him by a few grams. Judging by the girl's swift operation just now, the collection and tallying of loot were evidently not done manually, and there was little chance of error. On the other hand, there were people coming and going in this hall, and he knew the importance of discretion. If he felt uneasy, he could count them carefully later in a more stable setting. As Xiaonan was pondering, the girl's bored voice came once more from in front of him. Do you want to unregister the team badge? Xiaonan wasn't sure of the implications and asked somewhat puzzled. Excuse me, will unregistering affect me in any way? The team leader needs to pay an annual team fee of 20 gold coins. Unregister. It wasn't that Xiaonan was unwilling to spend those 20 gold coins. Well, it was a bit pricey indeed. Mainly, the Stinky Fish and Shrimp Group now only had himself left, and as a new adventurer with no experience in tasks, there was no point in maintaining the team, and he couldn't recruit anyone either. What he really should do now is find a team suitable for his development, and, as an ordinary member, gain a deeper understanding of everything he needed to know about this world, or simply operate alone, starting with the lowest risk and simplest tasks, taking it step by step. Therefore, Xiaonan decisively handed over the black iron badge to the other party. With many matters needing attention, he put the gold coins into his backpack and was about to leave when he suddenly remembered something and asked, "Do you know where I can buy healing potions?" From the previous battle with the bear goblin, Xiaonan was deeply impressed by Magi's healing potion, almost like a divine elixir. Slight injuries healed instantly, and even near-fatal wounds could be stabilized. Having a bottle of healing potion would be like having an additional ace, an extra layer of life insurance. If he could buy it with money, he certainly wouldn't miss the chance. Turn right to the far inside. The short-haired girl replied lazily without looking up. Hearing this, Xiaonan's eyes brightened, and he quickly thanked her and left. Sure enough, in the corner of the hall, there was a small shop with an Alchemist Association sign nestled among the crowd. It continued the branch's style reminiscent of the Mist Forest, but the shelves were filled with bottles and jars. Truth Potion, 150 gold coins. Highly Poisonous Potion, 200 gold coins. Light Resistance Potion, 300 gold coins. Just a glance at the prices gave Xiaonan a dizzy spell. These kinds of prices, the target customers must not be low-level adventurers like me. At that moment, he moved cautiously through the aisles, afraid of accidentally breaking a bottle and losing all his wealth. Soon, at the most conspicuous spot in the shop, he found his target. Healing Potion, 50 gold coins. Phew, thank goodness. After the earlier series of visual shocks, the potion's price wasn't as high as he'd expected. But considering his total assets added up to less than 50 gold coins, the price of this potion was quite substantial. Seeming to sense Xian'an's hesitation, the shop owner, a bald man in an off-white robe, ambled over with his hands behind his back. "Newbie?" he asked casually. Seeing Xian'an nod, the man pointed to the shelf behind him and said, "The cost-effectiveness of healing potions isn't high, and they're not often used by you guys. Comparatively, I actually recommend this more." Xianan looked in the direction the man indicated. He saw, in a corner of the shelf not far ahead, several leather pouches with classic herbal emblems casually stacked. Medical tools set, 5 gold coins, containing 10 uses of bandages, ointments, and splints. "I don't stock much of this. No one usually buys it from my shop. The general stores outside have plenty." "Thank for the tip." Xianan nodded in thanks, though his gaze returned again to the healing potion. In his mind, the priority of this life-saving elixir was undoubtedly the highest. Though a bit expensive, there was no immediate rush. After all, he still had many pieces of loot yet to process and hadn't taken on his next adventure task. Once he sorted out his savings, he could consider buying it later. "Are all the potion prices here this high?" Seeing the bald man looking approachable, Xianan couldn't help but voice his question. "You get what you pay for." He gestured with his hand. "They're all crafted by professional alchemists in the association Quality Assurance." Saying this, the bald man glanced toward the stairs at the back of the hall. "What I have here is just some cheaper items. The real top-quality stuff, it's all upstairs. Sharp Eye Potion, Vaporized Form, Hill, Giant Power, Tistis." He nodded with hands behind his back. "But their prices aren't for folks like us to afford." Upstairs, being new, Xianan was clueless about the workings of the association. The second floor of the hall is where those real adventurers with professional levels take on tasks. After all, you can't expect those guys to earn a few trifles at the forest's edge every day like you do, right? Understanding that the man's words held no intentional derision, just stating facts, Xianan didn't feel any unnecessary emotions. He was just about to take the chance to ask a few more questions when a voice called from the shop entrance. "Hey, where's the person?" "Boss, check me out." "Coming." The bald man leisurely strolled over with his hands behind him, giving Xianan another tip before leaving. "There's a stall selling manuals at the association entrance. If you're new, buying one to read might be helpful." Having completed his tasks and planning to leave the association anyway, Xianan naturally complied. After just a couple of inquiries, he found the manual the bald man had mentioned. 3 silver coins. Not too expensive, so he gritted his teeth and bought it. The cover was quite ornate, with 2 lines of big letters printed in an unknown font. Adventurer's Manual. River Valley Town Special Edition. Below was a line of white fine print as a supplement. 21 SD/Claw Moon, Key C/Arcane Calendar 1019 revision. Preface 1-2. Choice and Use of Weapons 3-9. How to Handle Your Loot 31-38. 9. about those shiny and beautiful stones. Cocooner's grocery store at 62, Miss Street offers the fairest prices in River Valley Town. However, it's undeniable that young Cocooner sometimes makes mistakes, 3 silver coin variants, with a risk of 100 gold coins. In contrast, the neighboring Fairy Wind, though stingy with their offers, has a shop owner, Forello, who is professionally trained in gemstones and once apprenticed at the most famous pawn shop in Noom, possessing the finest eye for detail in all of River Valley Town. High-quality goods should go to him. Snap! 3 small, opaque green stones with faint stripes are neatly arranged on the counter by Xiaonan. With a hint of expectation in his eyes, he harbors the fantasy of getting rich overnight. Looking at the sternly dressed, gold-rimmed, glasses-wearing middle-aged man in front of him. The man named Forello does not speak carelessly, even though he recognizes the type of gemstones at a glance. Instead, he picks each one up, turning them over and examining closely for a while, before sitting back behind the counter, uninterested. Malachite, ordinary quality, 10 gold each. 16. Where to toss the junk metal. First of all, stop your incessant chatter. You must know that those second-hand goods you've pulled off some unfortunate soul can only be sold at half price. It's common sense. Of course, magical items are an exception, if you actually have any. Secondly, if you really want to find a place to unload those heavy burdens you've been carrying, I recommend the Pecan Furnace at 25 Miss Street. The owner there was also an adventurer before. He knows how tough it is to haul this junk back, so he always offers a decent price, provided you don't mind the dozens of his glorious deeds he extends while appraising it for you. Additionally, for purchasing weapons and armor, Rock Hammer comes recommended. It's said the owner has a 64th of dwarf blood in him. Apart from a love for braided beards, he bears no similarity, but his craftsmanship is quite impressive. Equipment customization is also available. Oh, a moldy small round shield and some blood-stained leather armors. You're lucky it's me. At other shops, they probably dislike even a free giveaway, 10 gold. In front of him, a burly man with a face full of brown stubble said gruffly, "But I don't really blame you. When I was young, I also used to drag this stuff back. I remember once." Xiaonan, remembering the manual's advice, kept his mouth shut and didn't respond, giving no opportunity for the man to continue. These arrows are well maintained, but the poison applied has long been out of effect, and you haven't cleaned it? Adding in this dual-handed axe. 30 gold. TSK. A nail-head hammer? From a bear goblin? Those brutes don't maintain their weapons. 6 gold. Still, for someone your age, managing to hunt a bear goblin is commendable, even I back in the day. 20 minutes later. Bang! The door of the Pecan Furnace was gently closed. Breathing in the fresh air outside, Xiaonan rubbed his stiff face and exhaled deeply. Compared to his appearance just out of the mist forest, he now felt much lighter. In the time of one morning, aside from the ring deadline and 2 daggers from Elkie still strapped to his waist for emergencies, they were not sold. All other loot had been dealt with, counting the small bag of coins gathered from the goblin nest. Xianan's total assets now reached a staggering 131 gold, 5 silver, 9 copper. Undoubtedly, for the former self of a farmer boy growing up in the fields, this was a fortune he had never seen. Looking just at the numbers, one might not understand the meaning of this money. In terms of tangible goods, it equates to an entire warehouse full of flour, over 100 sheep, or more than 10 cows. In Xianan's previous village, this was already more than most villagers' entire family assets. And this was only the reward from a single quest. Only now, feeling the weight of over 100 gold coins in his backpack, Xiaonan truly understood why. Knowing this profession is extremely dangerous, nearly a life-or-death gamble, countless people still recklessly plunge into this mire each year. Of course, these gold coins might have tremendous purchasing power for ordinary items. But when it comes to things related to adventurers, it seems to become a different form of currency. Honestly speaking, excluding the deadline, all his possessions could only purchase 2 healing potions. Shaking his head with a bitter smile, Xiaonan forcibly suppressed the sense of unreality and disparity welling up inside him. and reopened the Adventurer's Manual. After bustling all morning, perhaps he should find a place to rest and get something to eat. White Sparrow Tavern. The low-priced food and drink, along with its convenient location next to the Adventurer Association, make it the top choice for low-level adventurers in River Valley Town. Xianen had visited once, invited by Magi. He recalled ordering gray squirrel meat fried rice with a glass of water. At that time, though, his mind was not on the food. He merely wolfed it down to fill his stomach. As a result, current Xianen has no clear recollection of the tavern's culinary standards. But since it's recommended in the manual, it should be decent. He mumbled to himself, pushing open the tavern door in front of him. Squeak! The strong aroma of alcohol and the noisy atmosphere seemed to envelop Xianen as he stepped inside. Bright streets outside, a warm tavern inside. Separated by a single door, it was like entering another world. Young adventurers with flushed faces stood on wooden tables, waving their unsheathed swords, loudly discussing something, while middle-aged men, with disheveled beards and weathered faces, silently drank in the corners. Colorful tapestries and flags, swirling smoke and brass oil lamps, long wooden tables and rough benches, maps, dice, goblets, leather armor, robes, and fingers plucking strings. This feels right. Finally, Xianen felt a sense of reality in this other world. The tavern's warm, soft light and the aroma of food in the air almost instantly relieved the fatigue that had accumulated in his body over recent days. Lifting his gaze across the hall, he found the tavern owner and moved towards him. The owner of the White Sparrow Tavern was a middle-aged man with a pair of mustaches, focusing intently on polishing a glass. Having seen countless adventurers, the owner naturally wouldn't give Xianen a second glance just because of his youthful appearance. Even when he walked straight over to the bar and sat down, the tavern owner merely raised his eyelids slightly. The lodging is 1 silver coin per night, right? Referencing the information provided in the Adventurer's Manual, Xianen confirmed. The other person nodded slightly. And what about long-term stays? Any discounts? Experience from the past life prompted Xianen to continue asking. That depends on how long you stay. Upon hearing this, he nodded and didn't ask further questions. The 1 silver coin/night rate at the White Sparrow Tavern was already among the relatively cheap rates in town. Any lower, and neither comfort nor safety would be guaranteed. Although long-term rental offers discounts, if one intends to delve deeper into the adventurer's trade, this kind of temporary accommodation lacks a sense of belonging. Moreover, there are certain risks involved with storing items or daily living. In fact, Xianen was more inclined to buy a property of his own in town. Of course, provided he had a certain understanding of the surrounding environment and sufficient funds. Perhaps he could try chatting with some real estate agents? He mused to himself. Meanwhile, driven by hunger pangs, Xianen's gaze lingered on the menu hanging on the wall. Set menu number 3, please. The price was 2 silver coins, equivalent to a day's wages for a laborer. It included a large portion of tender and fragrant stewed meat, a bowl of rich mushroom soup, several slices of white bread with butter and cheese, and a large mug of refreshing ale. As a meal, it might be a bit pricey, but for Xianen, who had just finished a dangerous journey and made a fortune, it was the best choice to soothe the body and mind. Honestly, the taste was quite good. The stewed meat was savory and flavorful, The mushroom soup especially fresh and sweet, particularly when paired with toast, allowing the flavor of the soup to seep into the bread, complemented by a small slice of soft, sweet, and salty cheese. Even Xiaonan, who was used to modern gourmet cuisines in his previous life, found himself somewhat amazed. Of course, it might also be because he had been munching on jerky and flatbread in the forest for many days, causing everything to taste wonderful now. With the meal settled in his stomach, his whole body seemed to be warmed and nourished. Sitting at the bar, Xiaonan's gaze swept over the tavern. Surprisingly, although he had arrived in an otherworld with a Western-style fantasy background, since crossing over, he hadn't actually seen many intelligent beings of other races. Probably 1 or 2 out of every 10 people he met, and most of them were dwarfs and half-orcs. He hadn't seen any dwarves or elves that frequently appeared on screens in his previous life. Suddenly, Xiaonan's gaze paused. Here's one. By the window in the tavern, at a rectangular wooden table, sat 4 figures of varying forms. A slender and beautiful young girl with blonde hair, in her early 20s, arms crossed in front of her chest, legs crossed, exuding a nonchalant aura. Next to her was a slightly chubby man dressed in luxurious and flamboyant attire, trying to flatter the girl with a fawning expression. But what caught Xiaonan's attention was the last figure, a tall man sitting alone at one side of the wooden table. With silver hair implying elven blood flowing freely down his shoulders, tied neatly at the back, he had delicate and soft features, fair skin, and the unique silver-gray eyes of an elf. But upon closer inspection, one could tell, though his ear tips were sharp, they were not as elongated as those of elves. Though he appeared thinner than an average male, he wasn't as slender as an elf either. So, probably a half-elf? Xiaonan speculated with his meager, otherworldly knowledge. Carrying a longbow on his back, that's consistent with my traditional impression of elves' profession choices. However, are these 4 team? Wait, there are 4. He suddenly realized he had overlooked something, like a TV remote that was right under his nose, but never found, or a phone held in hand but assumed lost. As he noticed something wrong, the figure he instinctively ignored finally appeared in Xiaonan's sight. A middle-aged man wearing tight-fitting clothes, with an unremarkable appearance. Compared to the 3 others around him, there was nothing noteworthy about him, as if he were just a bystander sitting at the same table. And it was precisely because of this that, when Xiaonan realized something was amiss, his heart skipped a beat. His eyes skimmed over the short dagger wrapped in coarse cloth at the man's waist, and then retracted as if electroshocked. What's wrong? Hyan tightened her somewhat loose ponytail, and with the corner of her eye catching her guard's unusual behavior, she couldn't help but ask. It's nothing, young master. Wood slightly furrowed his brows, glanced at a certain direction at the bar for a moment before turning back and replying. No need to be too tense. Although we're near the Mist Forest, this is River Valley Town after all. With so many adventurers coming and going on the street, nothing dangerous will happen. Upon hearing this, Wood's originally expressionless face couldn't help but show a hint of helplessness. Young master, precisely because there are adventurers here, we should be more careful. Of course, Hyan understood what her guard was implying. Perhaps due to his acknowledgement of the other's abilities, or maybe because of his disposition, he merely responded with a smile. Relax. The Adventurers Association is right next door to this tavern. Who would dare to cause trouble here with such audacity? Rather than worrying about these things, let's take this opportunity to discuss our future plans. To this, Guardwood could only furrow his brow even more deeply. Young master, although I've mentioned this a countless number of times, I must remind you again. Mist Forest is exceptionally dangerous. Even for me, venturing deep within doesn't guarantee a safe return. All right. The silver-haired half-elf waved his hand. Though his face did not show impatience, he still interrupted his words, jesting. Then let me reiterate, our objective this time is at the outskirts of the Mist Forest, the outskirts. All right, Wood had actually mentally conceded long ago. Otherwise, he wouldn't have allowed him to come here. But there's one condition you must agree to. What is it? We need to add a few more people to our group. Following his guard's gaze, the half-elf looked at the two people opposite him, showing some agreement on his face. "You're right." The malt aroma surged into his nostrils, and on his tongue was the unique subtle bitterness of hops and the crisp sweetness of chilled beverages. However, right now, he had no mind to savor this otherworldly flavored drink carefully. He even felt a bit nervous. After about 5 or 6 seconds, only when the sharp gaze behind him disappeared did he visibly breathe a sigh of relief. This feeling, Xiaonan recalled the scene he had just witnessed. That seemingly utterly ordinary man. It definitely wasn't an illusion. Even standing at the center of attention, he remained a presence so weak that one would subconsciously overlook him as if he were just a passerby. And after he noticed himself being watched, that gaze instantly focusing on him, delivering a strong warning. Just like those dazzling high-level pieces of equipment in online games from his previous life, even without engaging, one could feel the other's immense power with just a glance. Perhaps he's truly a professional who has finished his job transition, Xiaonan speculated in his heart. Fortunately, he only noticed the other's presence and didn't make any abrupt moves. Thus, that gaze only lingered for a moment before dissipating amidst the tavern's clamor. A minor episode. Without intentionally observing the elven team by the window, Xiaonan downed his mug of ale in one gulp. His heart was somewhat stirred. I still don't know how to attain this so-called professional level. Magi seemed to mention in front of his original self that profession was related to the battle skill he chose to learn. But the exact relationship wasn't clarified by the other party. He also skimmed through the adventurer's manual, but did not find any relevant information. I'll try asking more seasoned adventurers in the future. If that's unfeasible, paying a price to know is acceptable. Contemplating, Xiaonan shook his head. Considering these matters now is still too early for him, just a rookie adventurer. I should get a good night's sleep first. The lodging conditions in the tavern weren't great. The bed made of hardwood panels had a slight, unusual smell. The poor sound insulation allowed him to hear every creak of the rocking bed next door. The stairs squeaked, and the revelry from the tavern hall downstairs, along with the occasional mice running across the ceiling, could be heard clearly. Compared to the star-rated hotels of his past life, even lying down with a newspaper on a park bench seemed much more peaceful and free. Yet Xiaonan still slept until noon. On the one hand, he stayed up late the previous night flipping through the adventurer's manual, learning a lot of useful information about River Valley Town. On the other hand, his body was excessively exhausted. The Mist Forest was full of dangers. Even the former 4-person team with Elke and Gag needed to take turns keeping watch, unable to rest peacefully. Now arriving in the safe town, this was his first good night's sleep since he crossed into this world. After a delightful lunch at the White Sparrow Tavern, he once again arrived at the entrance to the Adventurer Association. For Xiaonan, who was just an ordinary office worker in his previous life, he naturally wasn't adapted to or eager for the adventurer lifestyle which tread a tightrope of danger. But similarly, for someone who lived his entire life in a magicless technology side world, suddenly arriving in a fantasy world with actual supernatural powers, it wasn't feasible to have him return to the peaceful pastoral life of working from sunrise to sunset with 100 or so gold coins in his pocket. Moreover, the only connection Xiaonan currently had with a golden finger, the attribute panel, was applicable only to adventure-related matters. He naturally had to make use of it. I'll start with the simplest tasks. Staring at the bustling entrance of the association, Xiaonan murmured as he made up his mind, stepping forward. His figure disappeared into the crowd. Is there anything wrong, Wood? A voice filled with curiosity from Hyan came from his side, and Wood retracted his gaze from Xianan's retreating back, replying softly. Nothing, young master. He had already spotted that person who was in a concealing breath state in the tavern yesterday, and today they coincidentally met again at the association entrance. As a qualified guard known for his prudence, Wood couldn't help but feel suspicious. But he had also observed closely yesterday. The young man with black hair and sharp features, although showing some signs of training, appeared to be a rookie through and through, judging by his attire and behavior. Could it really be that he was overthinking? Wood's eyebrows furrowed slightly, doubt clouding his expression. On the other side, the silver-haired, gray-eyed half-elf Hyan obviously didn't know what was going through his guard's mind. At that moment, Hyan was introducing the task details to a new member of the team, roughly within this range, and if nothing is found, you can extend further outward. So, you actually aren't sure what you're looking for. Upon hearing this, the black, lean man in front of Hyan, dressed in classic adventurer's leather armor and boots, exclaimed in surprise. The Mist Forest isn't a place you can just wander around. We'll stay on the outskirts. It won't. Hyan's words were cut off by a rather ostentatious voice. 3 days. Within the group, a slightly chubby young man dressed in a luxurious gold-plated robe held up 3 fingers and exclaimed loudly, "You won't need to help us find it. When the time's up, you can leave if you want. No need to drag on." As for safety, the slightly chubby young man glanced at the guard beside Hyan. "You don't need to worry about that." Upon hearing this, the lean man's eyes locked onto him, gritting his teeth. "All right, but I want 70 gold." 70? The chubby young man's voice suddenly became sharp. "Just 50. In such a big adventurer association, there's always someone willing to take the job if you don't." Uncontrolled volume led their argument at the association's entrance to gradually attract the attention of passers-by around. Perhaps because of this, the golden-haired girl beside the young man, who had been silent and impatient all the while, suddenly urged, "Larry, we've been in town for days now, and it's so boring. I want to go home." Immediately after her words fell, the chubby young man named Larry suddenly toned down his initially aggressive demeanor, pulling his expensive custom robe and leaning over with a flattering look. "Don't worry, Doris. We'll leave soon. I've heard from the family's guards that the white mists inside the Mist Forest are actually condensed magic power, and it's said that just a whiff." The half-elf Hyan withdrew his helpless gaze from the two, once again looking at the black lean man before him who had just joined the team, and then reneged, asking for a higher price. "We can only offer 50 gold on our side. If you don't accept it, then we'll have to say sorry." His demeanor remained calm. To some extent, the fat man carry could be credited with a little merit. After this, the black lean man, not wanting the lucrative job to slip away, put on a reluctant expression and nodded. "Fine, 50 gold it is. When do we leave?" "Today. We have already prepared the supplies." A transcendent level wild swamp druid, Spore Collective, has contaminated the water source in the Noom Lower District, directly causing the death of 153 civilians and a nearly 2-month water outage in the nearby area. For detailed information, please contact the association staff. Those who provide location intel will receive a reward from the Meadow Church. Time limit, none. Xiaonan looked at the long string of zeros behind the reward section and couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Currently, he was standing in front of the task board in the Adventurer Association's hall. Having decided to pursue the path of an adventurer, he planned to take on a few simple tasks to practice, while also familiarizing himself with the entire process. Then, with the sincere mentality of "I can't afford it, but I can take a look." He glanced at the top of the task board, where the tasks with the highest rewards were listed. TSK Tisk. Xiaonan clicked his tongue and memorized several useful terms like Transcendent Level and Wild Swamp Druid from the task information that he didn't yet understand. Then his gaze shifted downwards to the bottom of the task board. Task number 201D. Type: Investigation. Reward: 200 gold. Task briefing. A merchant convoy traveling from River Valley Town to nearby villages went missing on the road from Kalanfor to Chuishi Village, located on the east side of Mist Forest. The convoy owner suspects they might have been attacked by bandits or demons and needs adventurers to investigate. Time limit: 15 days. Extra information. Recently, adventurers have discovered traces of thorn demons around Chuishi Village, possibly related to the convoy's disappearance. What is a thorn demon anyway? Not to mention the two place names in the task briefing that were unfamiliar to his past memories. Just hearing the term thorn demon was enough to remind him of the painful memories of facing bear goblins in the Goblin Cave. Any demon with a name I've never heard of until I buy some book like the Monster Encyclopedia to understand their specific strength, I'll regard them as powerful demons I can't handle alone. Moreover, the uncertainty of investigation tasks is too high, making it hard to ensure that the difficulty won't suddenly escalate to a six-figure bounty level. I really should first find a more experienced team to stay with for a while, Xiaonan thought, rubbing his slightly sore brow. Otherwise, with just that thin adventurer's manual in hand, he's afraid he wouldn't even understand the names of the demons he encounters along the way. His gaze continued to move downwards. Finally, after a long search, he found a choice at the corner of the task board that he was fully capable of handling with his current abilities. Task number 387H. Type: Collection. Reward: 1 gold/clump. Task briefing. The owner of Green Grass Cauldron at 17 West Street, River Valley Town, MS, Edwina, is preparing a batch of new detoxification potions and urgently needs a large amount of firefly garlic vine that grows on the outskirts of Mist Forest. See attached image. Time limit: 3 days. Comparing the illustrations and descriptions shown on the task board, Xiaonan's eyes immediately lit up. He very clearly remembered seeing a large patch of this plant, which emits a greenish glow like a firefly at night, on his way back from Mist Forest a few days ago. He remembered initially mistaking it for some kind of demon that lures prey with light and had camped at a distant location. Thinking back now, the amount of firefly garlic vine must be at least 30 clumps, and that would mean an income of over 30 gold coins. After all, the Stinky Fish and Shrimp group barely earned 30 gold from their task of investigating goblin activity after fighting to the death until he was the only temporary member left. This money is practically being handed to him on a silver platter. It would be a waste not to earn it. Is my beginner's luck still going strong? Xiaonan couldn't help but think happily. Yet his body was already turning towards the exit of the Adventurer Association. Before heading out on the task, he needed to make some necessary preparations. Xiaonan clearly understood his position. Even though he had mastered the battle skill Vortex Slash, which had already leveled up to full level 5, and his physical fitness had improved due to acquiring attribute points, he still belonged to the ranks of low-level adventurers. The tragedies of Elki and Gag were still vividly remembered. Even an experienced adventurer like Magi had fallen at the hands of this youngster. Being cautious and considerate, there's no harm in that. Thus, for his first solo task, Xiaonan followed the suggestions given in the Adventurer's Manual, preparing thoroughly, almost to an exaggerated extent. The round trip would take just 1 day, and keeping in mind the storage space needed for the Firefly Garlic Vine, he took enough food and water to survive in the wild for 5 days, 8 silver and 2 copper. A medical tool set containing bandages, ointments, and splints, enough for 10 uses, and even got the general store owner to throw in 20 feet of hemp rope. 5 gold. Compass, simple map, firestone, sleeping bag, blanket, water bottle, and other essential living supplies. 6 gold, 2 silver. It's worth mentioning that to avoid having to discard his backpack laden with belongings during any adventure accidents, Xiaonan deposited most of the gold coins he had earned in the only bank within River Valley Town. The interest was negligible, but it was very safe. Although the prices of these adventure-related items reached another dimension, he understood very well the expenditure was necessary to ensure his life safety. What's more, the task's route was short, so if everything went well, he'd be back at the White Sparrow Tavern enjoying a feast with the 30 gold coins reward this time tomorrow. The items prepared above would use at most 1/10 of their capacity. They could still be used for the next task. Schwa, striking off the penultimate item listed on the note in his hand. Xiaonan tightened the backpack behind him and took a deep breath. Thanks to the one-stop service on the street where the Adventurer Association was located, he completed most of his pre-departure preparations in just one morning. Recalling himself carrying large and small bags, holding a shopping list with one hand, weaving through bizarre pedestrians, walking between various shops, Xiaonan suddenly felt a déjà vu of shopping in Diagon Alley before starting school at Hogwarts, something from movies in his past life. Can't go back now. He smiled and shook his head, looking at the last item on his list. Weapons and equipment. The armor and weapons produced here are renowned for their durability, earning quite a reputation among the low-level adventurers in town. There are even rumors that suggest professional adventurers from the association's second floor frequently commission equipment from Rockhammer. This naturally makes the blacksmith shop's business increasingly prosperous. Today, guided by the adventurer's manual in preparation for an upcoming quest, Xiaonan finally met the owner of this blacksmith shop, Barn Steelbeard, a name distinctly characteristic of a dwarf. His muscles, knotted and piled up like steel, and the reddish-brown braid of his beard nearly reaching his chest were consistent with the traditional image of a dwarf. However, standing a good half-head taller than bear goblins at 2 meters 3, it was hard to believe his claim of dwarven blood in his veins. More like those barbarians from the frozen plains. Xiaonan thought as he looked at the robust figure in the shop, and couldn't help but mutter internally. Yet his feet didn't stop, and he walked straight in. Unexpectedly, though claiming the lineage of the Steelbeard clan, Barn, the owner of the Rockhammer blacksmith shop, didn't possess the brutish and reckless personality traditionally associated with dwarves. Quite the contrary, he seemed like an ordinary, enthusiastic shopkeeper, proactively introducing the products when Xiaonan showed an interest in buying. This ring armor is the lightest among heavy armors, and the iron rings can effectively block slashing damage from swords and axes. This suit of lock armor is also good, offering even more defense than the ring armor. However, it's also about 10 gold coins more expensive. With Barnes' detailed explanations in his ears, Xiaonan's gaze swept over the display rack. Pause. This set, what came into view was an entire suit of fully enclosed armor made of hardened iron plates and metal fastenings. Iron gloves, heavy leather boots, an open-work helmet with an integrated faceplate, and underneath it a thick, durable leather padding, accompanied by metal plates interlaced with belts and buckles radiating a cold sheen. At first glance, it gave the illusion of a moving fortress. If he could don this ultra-heavy armor, even standing amidst a horde of goblins, letting them bash away for a couple of hours with their little wooden sticks wouldn't even loosen a strand of hair. But likewise, the thick metal plates, while providing formidable defense, also imparted an immense weight unbearable to most. Considering his current physical condition, even normal walking would be a challenge. Full body plate armor, crafted from high-quality steel, with every piece of metal forged and refined by me personally. Barn introduced with pride at just the right moment. The defense speaks for itself. Just a glance, and you'll know. If you purchase the whole set, we at Rockhammer offer 3 free maintenance services. 1,500 gold, no credit. Hearing the price, Xiaonan quickly dismissed the idea. Clearly, such equipment was not something he could consider. Practicality should prevail right now. Fortunately, Rockhammer offered a comprehensive range of equipment, and after making a round with Barn and listening to a simple introduction, he already had some ideas. The styles of armor were numerous, yet roughly divided into 3 types: light armor, medium armor, and heavy armor. The heavy armor was too cumbersome, severely limiting Xianan's agility, not matching his current combat style. So he decided against it. Medium armor was quite decent, balancing between heavy and light armor, being versatile with commendable defensive performance. Perhaps as a consequence, it came with the highest average price among the 3 armor types. Even the cheapest chainmail among them cost a whopping 50 gold coins. This was completely beyond Xianan's budget. Ultimately, after some indecisive deliberation, he spent 10 gold for a set of custom leather armor from Barnes' store. This type of armor boasted high flexibility and extremely light weight, with leather soaked in boiled oil to make it even sturdier as the main material. Coming from the renowned blacksmith shop, Rockhammer, its quality was excellent. Its overall performance was multiple times stronger than the second-hand gear he had somehow acquired before. With the armor issue resolved, next was shield. Xianan paused for a moment, then waved to Barn in front of him. No, better not. I'm not good at using it. The real world, unlike games, didn't allow you to casually raise a shield to easily fend off enemy attacks, or even press a button at the right moment to perform a so-called block and counterattack. Especially in the complex environment of the Mist Forest, if you hadn't mastered the associated shield techniques, even the hardest shield would just be like holding a door plank in your hand. What Xianan most needed at the moment was to find a weapon that suited him. Fortunately, as the owner of the Rockhammer blacksmith shop, weapon forging was precisely Barnes' best skill. Flail, light hammer, axe spear. A variety of weapons, both light and heavy, covered almost an entire wall. Long-handled knife, single-edged, great for open-field combat. Iron-edged hammer, an armor-breaking tool. One strike, and the armor stays intact while the person inside doesn't. Xianan's gaze followed Barnes' introduction, scanning each of these weapons one by one. Gradually, he became clear about his thoughts. Firstly, the weapon itself shouldn't be too light. He wasn't the assassin type like Elke, with nimble combat style. The 2 short daggers he carried were just for emergencies. The highly flexible and lightweight leather armor, combined with the freedom of not having to hold shield, made him more inclined towards a weapon that could be wielded with both hands. Like the one-handed sword previously, though sharp enough, left an awkward spare hand in battle. Gag's dual-handed axe, though powerful, sometimes felt cumbersome in action. Secondly, the weapon type must be compatible with Vortex Slash. Though this trump card, thanks to his previous efforts and the attribute panel support, had been leveled up to LVL 5 full level, becoming almost second nature to him. Not only with small daggers, but even with a field hoe, Xianan could effortlessly execute Vortex Slash. But given the choice, he wanted to find a most suitable weapon. Therefore, it's just as Xianan was lost in contemplation over his weapon choice, Barn, who was explaining and observing him at the same time, seemed to have misunderstood something. He immediately broke into a hearty smile, pulling the bewildered Xianan aside. No need to be shy. Everyone's a novice at some point. And it's okay if you're short on gold coins. Although we don't accept credit, we do have relatively cheaper goods available. Take a look. Do you see anything you like? After all, he hadn't made a decision yet, and taking a look at more was a good thing. Don't worry, even though these are secondhand goods, since I dare to put them up for sale, the quality is surely up to standard and durable. The thick voice echoed in the shop, as Barn patted his chest and promised. What lay before Xia Nen were many old-looking weapons. They didn't have their own dedicated shelves, just simply piled together, clearly not very valued by the shop owner. But through the metallic sheen emanating from the surfaces of those weapons, and the occasional flash of cold light as the gaze shifted, at least Barnes' words were not exaggerations. They were indeed second-hand, but quite well-maintained. Xia Nen squatted down, patiently picking them out from the pile one by one, examining them closely while asking, "Do high-level adventurers use this kind of weapon too? Not this second-hand stuff, but those plain ones. Non-magical items, you know." In response, Barnes stroked his beard and said in a rough voice, "Many times, adventurers like you, newly starting out, with no offense intended, always harbor many fantasies about those who have professional levels and are more experienced. But actually, they're human too. They need to spend money on food, might fall out over the ownership of a trophy, and would save up earnings for half a year just to get a house in a great location. Magic items do tend to appear more often in the hands of high-level professionals, but those who are affluent enough to be fully equipped with them are still quite rare. What about in our store?" Xia Nan asked casually, as though just making conversation while picking out weapons. "Do you also sell those legendary magical equipment?" Barn did not respond, just gave a mysterious smile. Receiving this key piece of information, Xia Nan no longer wasted time, dusted off his hands at a gathered grime, and slowly stood up. The reality was second-hand goods were indeed just second-hand, and after searching through, there wasn't a suitable choice. The wealth of over 100 gold coins wasn't a major sum, but it was enough to buy a brand-new plain weapon. If possible, naturally, Buzz. Out of the corner of his eye, a gray luster silently flickered. Xianan's gaze instinctively followed it. In just a few breaths, he paused, stared, furrowed his brow. Then his expression returned to calm. The semi-transparent panel before him faded and disappeared as his attention dispersed. Sturdy beheading longsword. Type, dual-handed sword. Level, ordinary white. Effect, durability plus 50%, beheading damage plus 5%. Description, a fine creation from the Rockhammer blacksmith shop. A small mishap during forging seems to have caused some peculiar change with this longsword. Remarks, 1, 2, 3. Wait, how many times did I hit it with a hammer just now? Rockhammer, Steelbeard Clan 492nd Forging Competition, 105th place, Barn Steelbeard. This was a dual-handed long sword buried in shadows. With a handle about 9 inches long, its spiral metal texture and protruding rivets enhanced the grip friction for the hand, also providing a certain feel when grasped. The steel crossguard didn't extend much to the sides, barely going half a finger broader than the blade before retracting, giving it a particularly streamlined look. The blade was about 4 feet long, 3 fingers wide, thin, with sleek lines and sharp edges. The minimalist style was consistent throughout, with no patterns on the blade surface, only occasionally catching a sharp flash of light for decoration. Unlike the other weapons in the store, this longsword had an extremely peculiar iron-gray color, as if a thin mist covered the blade, making it far less noticeable than other blades. On the surface, Xiaonan showed no reaction, but inside a storm was brewing. He pretended to be nonchalant, speaking apathetically. "Why does this sword color seem a bit odd? Is it a defective product?" Upon hearing this, Barnes surprisingly showed a slightly embarrassed expression, scratching his head awkwardly. "Hee, a few days ago, I was going to forge a dual-handed sword, but got a bit distracted while sharpening." "Wait, I was just saying casually, is it really being sold as a defective product?" Xianan pursed his lips, struggling to keep a straight face. Beside him, Barn was oblivious to his reaction and continued rattling on. "Sigh, what a pity for this dozen pounds of gray steel sent to me by my cousin in the clan for testing from a new mining pit at Flamecast Peak. No idea how to answer when asked later." "Oh," Xianan raised an eyebrow, following up, This sword just seems a bit strange in color. Where's the flaw? Barnes still did not notice his subtly fluctuating tone, only absorbed in his regretful thoughts. He stepped forward, took the dual-handed sword, and pointed to the blade. Normally, equipment forged from gray steel should be a light limestone gray. Look, isn't this sword's color a bit deeper? It's because I got distracted and hammered a few extra times while forging the blade, which dragged down the entire process afterward. As he spoke, Barnes showed an even more regretful expression. You might find that aside from the color, it doesn't differ from other weapons on the surface, but there might be hidden issues in the blade, and it could unexpectedly break in battle, which can't be tested. You know, the equipment from Rockhammer is always renowned for its toughness and durability. For work like this one, where misstep in the forging process prevents precise quality control, naturally I won't sell it as a regular product. It's clan policy that we can't sacrifice reputation for the profit of a few dozen gold, something they tell everyone before going out. At this moment, Xiaonan once again appreciated the convenience of the golden finger. Information gap. Barnes' slip during forging made it hard for him to vouch for the sword's quality, fearing possible issues could tarnish Rockhammer's reputation. But with the attribute panel, Xiaonan clearly knew. The small misstep didn't reduce the sword's quality. Instead, it made the blade more sturdy and durable, even gaining some additional traits. He must get it, he silently resolved. With Barnes having explained why he considered the long sword a defective product, Xiaonan no longer hid his intentions and directly asked, "I'll take this sword. How much is it?" "Didn't I just explain?" Barnes was puzzled, then said in surprise, "The sword had issues during forging. The quality is uncertain. I think it's perfect for me. I'll take it." Seeing Xiaonan's determined attitude, Barnes stopped arguing, just looked at him for a few seconds, then helplessly said, "Fine, but later if there's a problem, don't come whining to me and outside. Don't say you got this sword here, all right?" "Of course." Xiaonan nodded sincerely. "I picked up the sword in a goblin cave. 35 gold at cost price." And naturally, it brings forth dangerous demons born from the pale white mist, living long in a high-density magic environment, enjoying the abundant magic's nourishment. These demons either possess bodies far more robust than ordinary creatures or are inherently capable of manipulating natural laws. They occupy the highest ecological niche in the entire forest. Yet similarly, their ability to sit stably at the pyramid's top relies heavily on the support of the massive foundation below. This forest, perpetually shrouded in a thin mist, also houses a vast number of ordinary creatures not listed in the monster encyclopedia. Rustle. A gentle breeze brushed by, and leaves floated down. The brown bark resembled a dried-up waterway, rough and filled with cracks and ruts. From afar, it seemed just like the most common oak branch in the forest. But if you were patient enough and observed more closely, you would gradually discover the fleeting flash of a scarlet snake tongue in the air and the long, slender outline that subtly protruded and extended from the tree trunk surface. This was a Rosalind's viper. The light brown mottled patterns on its dense scales, along with the patience and sluggishness unique to cold-blooded animals, made it almost blend into the environment. And its triangular, pointed head naturally hinted at the intense toxicity this type of snake possessed. It waited silently. There was never a shortage of prey in the mist forest. Its unique body structure, capable of swallowing creatures several times its size, with a nearly 5-foot length and sharp fangs underneath its skull ready to inject venom at any moment. Minute's prey list wasn't limited to frogs and lizards, but even included some small to medium-sized mammals. And should it encounter creatures that were excessively large, the survival instincts born from deep within its bloodline would steer them away from such a venomous danger. Squeak, a long-eared rat, covered in fur, cautiously moved its body among the fallen leaves. Its clear and foolish rodent eyes seemed to have already foretold its fate. It gradually approached. The viper's cold vertical pupils bore no emotion, its neck coiled and muscles tense. The explosive muscles beneath its scales allowed it to inject its venom into its target within mere fractions of a second, followed by tightening its coils, waiting quietly for the prey to die. The small brown scales trembled slightly under the swelling muscles. This was the precursor to its attack. Then, buzz! An iron-gray sharp glint flickered briefly in the air. Amidst the fine wood shavings flying from the trunk, the long-eared rat fled into the depths of the underbrush in a panic. The viper's body remained tensed and coiled, poised to hunt. But its head had already been severed by the cold, sharp blade. Damn! Gave me a scare. With lingering fear, Xianan exerted slight force with his right hand, pulling the beheading longsword out from the tree trunk with effort. This was already his second day returning to the mist forest. Contrary to what he'd expected, the forest's complex environment, filled with mist and countless similar trees, made it difficult to navigate, even with a professional compass and crude map purchased from the grocery store shelves. Plus, being alone, every slight sound around him kept Xianan on high alert, cautiously advancing. So much so that his progress was even slower than the stinky fish and shrimp group before. Back then, he hadn't felt it, but thinking back now, it was probably because Magi had some kind of professional combat skills for exploring directions. Luckily, the location of the Firefly Garlic Vine in his memory wasn't far from River Valley Town. After an afternoon and another half of a morning, he pretty much reached it. Digging a small pit in the ground, Xianan disdainfully used his sword's tip to lift the snake head and throw it in. The cold knowledge he didn't know, where he picked up from his past life, made him aware that even when decapitated, snakes can still contract their muscles and inject venom due to muscle memory. So, for safety's sake, it was best to bury its head to avoid getting bitten. In Xianan's eyes, the mist forest's most dangerous things, naturally, were those bizarre demons. But those various snakes and insects encountered everywhere on the road were undoubtedly the most disgusting.